I know the smell of rain on concrete better than I know the smell of my own mother. That's not a metaphor. That's a balance sheet. My name is Marcus, and for the first 20 years of my life, I didn't have a last name. What I did have was a bridge, 2 hands, and a hunger that operated like compound interest. The longer you let it run, the deeper it ate into your principal. Let me give you the actual numbers on what built from nothing really looks like. Because the inspirational poster quote version always leaves out the operational details. Age 7. Sleeping inside a plastic trash bag. Why? Because it was the only wind barrier available in my price range, which was 0. Age 9. Running a cost-benefit analysis on whether to contest a 30-pound stray dog for a half-eaten hamburger. I ran the math. The dog had weight and aggression on his side. I had reach and absolute desperation on mine. Most nights, the dog won. But on the nights I won, I learned exactly how much I was willing to bleed for a single calorie. I grew up in Imperial City, a particular kind of cruelty that only geography can produce. Above the light, glass towers of vertical ambition, where people ate single dishes that cost more than my future monthly salary. Below the light, the gutters, where kids like me ran a different kind of school. Our curriculum: observation, pattern recognition, resource management, survival. I never attended a formal institution. I educated myself the way the broke always do. Discarded newspapers, overheard conversations, magazines salvaged from recycling bins. By 15, I knew more about capital structure than most university sophomores. Not out of ambition, out of utility. Knowledge was the one asset class no one could repossess when they chased you off a doorstep. So I weaponized it. I took on every odd, off-the-books part-time job I could find. Night security, dishwashing, hauling scrap metal in the freezing rain. I didn't spend a dime of it on anything frivolous. Every single dollar was funneled into a highly calculated objective: formal education. I enrolled in night school, then community college. Not for the college experience. Not to make friends. I was there for the credential. I needed that piece of paper to act as a skeleton key to a corporate salary, a legitimate life, and a future that didn't involve calculating caloric value against fighting weight. By 18, the strategy paid off. I had a room, walls that didn't breathe wind. By 19, I landed an intern position at Apex Solutions. My credentials were technically fraudulent, but intellectually accurate. I arrived every day like the most grateful person in the building, because relative to sleeping in a trash bag, I genuinely was. I built a small life. Mine. Real. Benny worked 2 desks over. Victoria supervised the floor with a strictness that never crossed into cruelty. And Martha owned the building where I rented my room. She treated me like a son. It was the first time anyone had ever done that. I didn't know how to process love, so I paid my rent 3 days early. Every single month. I thought I had finally hacked the algorithm of survival. I was wrong. On the morning of my 20th birthday, the architecture of my life changed. I woke to a notification, but it didn't come from my phone. It came from inside my own skull. Clean, precise, and cold as a contract clause. Infinite cashback system activated. Host, Marcus. Protocol: every expenditure shall return multiplied. Initial balance transferred. Your ledger opens now. I lay on my mattress and ran a diagnostic on my own cognition. No fever. Consistent memory. But the notification remained. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text only. Marcus, my name is Arthur. I believe I am your father. Please do not delete this message. I deleted the message. 3 minutes later, a second unknown number. A photograph attached. A woman with my exact jawline. My exact orbital structure, wearing diamonds in front of a mansion. Caption: your mother has been looking for you for 20 years. I put the phone face down, and I made instant noodles. Because when your entire reality glitches, you default to the only variable you can control. Here is what I already knew about the Gu family, assembled from 2 years of reading Imperial City's business press. Arthur Gu, the patriarch. Eleanor, the wife. Sarah, the elder daughter holding operational control. And Cain, the 21-year-old son, the presumptive heir with 0 independently documented accomplishments. Here is what I knew about myself. I had eaten garbage. I had built every asset I possessed through manual effort and sustained attention. I had 0 sentiment about any of this. Sentiment is a luxury good, and I had been running a lean operation since birth. I did not feel joy when that photograph arrived. I felt the specific, primal alertness that comes when an environment changes faster than your models predicted. Wealthy families do not search for lost children out of uncomplicated love. They search because they need something. And when people with generational wealth need something from people without it, the transaction structure is almost never equitable. Still, I agreed to the DNA test. Not for them. For documentation. I wanted it on record, in a certified lab, with a verified chain of custody, that these people shared biology with a man who had once calculated caloric value against fighting weight when assessing a dog. I wanted that truth somewhere it couldn't be edited later. Arthur met me outside the facility. Silver-haired. Tall. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had prepared several mental categories for an encounter and found that none of them fit. "I'm Arthur," he said. "Your father." "I know who you are," I replied. "Use your hair for the sample." He did. The technician told us 30 minutes for the preliminary results. I left before the machine even finished processing. I had agreed to participate. I hadn't agreed to the reunion scene. I went home. I canceled my lease renewal with Martha. Not because I had to, but because I understood, with the calm certainty of someone who has learned to read shifts in terrain, that the ground under my life was about to move. I ate dinner. I went to bed at 9 because I had work in the morning. But at 11:47 p.m., the system gave me my first task. Task 001. Expenditure of $4 million required before midnight. Completion triggers first cashback event. I read it twice. Then I laughed out loud in the dark. "Right," I muttered to the empty room, my voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm only a guy who's fought a dog for a hamburger can muster. "4 million. Sure. Let me just pull that out of my mattress. If I had that kind of cash, I wouldn't be staring at a water stain on a ceiling I can't afford to fix. I'd be living well." The response was instantaneous. No delay. No judgment. Just cold, hard utility. "System, a black debit card has been materialized in the left breast pocket of your Apex Solutions work jacket. This card is linked to the system. It is to be used exclusively for task completion. System, all reward capital will be routed directly to your original, pre-existing personal bank account. Routing is masked. It will not flag audits, tax algorithms, or banking compliance protocols. The money will simply appear as legitimate, untraceable income." I sat up. I walked over to my chair, where my faded blue work jacket was draped. I reached into the left breast pocket. My fingers brushed against cold, heavy plastic. I pulled it out. Matte black. No bank logo. Just my name, embossed in silver. Marcus. I checked my phone. Opened my actual bank app. The balance was exactly what it had been yesterday. Enough for rent, groceries, and maybe a bus ticket if I was careful. The system wasn't lying. It wasn't going to overwrite my reality. It was going to fund it. The next morning, I confirmed the card worked on a small test purchase. Once I knew the system was real and the money wouldn't vanish, I did something entirely illogical for a man obsessed with asset accumulation. I used a fraction of the initial transfer to address the foundational deficits of my past. I bought proper clothes. Not thrift store armor or corporate uniforms, but tailored garments that actually fit my shoulders. And I bought proper food. Not instant noodles calculated for caloric survival, but a hot, complex meal I had always wanted to try, ordered without once glancing at the prices on the right side of the menu. It wasn't an investment. It was a correction. Then I went to work. Because the task still needed to be completed, and the most efficient way to move $4 million was through high-volume retail. Prosper Plaza opens at 10. I was there at 10:15. I started with Ralph Lauren and Rolex, not because I had an opinion about either brand, but because they were established stores with reliable inventory. My task required volume. I needed quality that would hold value. I was not buying status. I was deploying capital under a time constraint, and these were the most efficient instruments available at that address. The DNA results came through while I was in the third boutique. Sarah delivered them personally, which told me something about how the Goof family operated. They used family members for functions that other families delegated to intermediaries. She moved through the floor with the authority of someone who knew her net worth was larger than most people's cities. She sat in the general manager's chair without asking. The manager let her. She handed me a folder. I opened it. Paternity probability, 99.9%. I closed the folder. "I've seen the result," I said. "I'm not returning to your family." Sarah's expression ran through several calculations. She had prepared for multiple response scenarios. This one wasn't in the set. "You are my brother," she said, with the patience of someone accustomed to eventual compliance. "We cannot leave a member of the family outside." "I'm not outside anything. I have a job." "Marcus, give yourself a week," I said pleasantly. "You may adjust to it." I walked back to the counter. Sarah left the folder behind when she went. I put it in my jacket pocket. Evidence. The first document in what would become a file. At 11:51 p.m., the system registered task completion. Task 001 complete. Cashback multiplier, 3x. $12 million transferred. Bonus asset, Apex Tower. Title documents added to system inventory. I sat with that for a moment. Apex Tower, the building I had badged into every morning for 14 months with an intern ID. The building where I ate lunch alone at my desk, took the elevator to the 20th floor, and made myself coffee in the break room kitchen like I belonged there. Which, as of tonight, I legally did. In the most complete possible sense. I put the title document in the same folder as the DNA results. The next morning, I went to Starry Manor, which I had also apparently acquired. The system had been thorough, and stood in the master bedroom for 20 minutes, just processing the view. Then I put on my intern badge, walked out the door, and went back to my desk. Because I still had work to do in the morning. There is a specific kind of power in being invisible. When you grow up in the gutters, you learn that visibility is a liability. If the predators can see you, they can target you. So, you blend into the concrete. You become part of the background noise. For the first 3 weeks of my new life, I maintained that invisibility perfectly. By day, I was Marcus, the quiet, efficient intern at Apex Solutions. I fetched coffee. I organized spreadsheets. I sat at a desk in the corner of the 20th floor, wearing my new tailored clothes under a cheap, oversized blazer to hide them, keeping my head down. By night, I was the ghost in the machine. I lived in Starry Manor. I reviewed the title deeds to my growing portfolio of assets, waiting for the system's next prompt. I thought I had separated the two worlds cleanly. I was wrong. The worlds were about to collide, and the catalyst was a man who had never known the weight of a single calorie. It was a Tuesday morning when the atmosphere on the 20th floor shifted. You can feel wealth before you see it. It changes the air pressure. The chatter in the open-plan office died down. The typing stopped. Through the glass doors walked Cain, the presumptive heir, 21 years old. He wore a suit that cost more than my first 3 years of rent combined, tailored to hide the fact that he had never done a day of physical labor in his life. He was flanked by 2 lawyers and an assistant who looked like she was vibrating with anxiety. He wasn't here for a tour. He was here for blood. Apex Solutions was a mid-tier logistics firm, but it held a critical, localized distribution license that the Gu family's conglomerate needed to bypass a regulatory bottleneck. Cain was here to execute a hostile, lowball acquisition. He was here to bully. I watched from my corner desk as he bypassed Victoria, the floor supervisor, and walked straight into the glass-walled conference room. He didn't wait for an invitation. He sat at the head of the table, put his polished Oxfords up on the mahogany, and smiled like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. 10 minutes later, the meeting exploded. I couldn't hear the exact words through the soundproof glass, but I could read the body language. Cain was leaning forward, pointing a manicured finger. The Apex executives were shrinking, pale, and sweating. Then, Cain stood up. He walked out of the conference room, his eyes scanning the floor like a king inspecting his new, pathetic subjects. His gaze landed on me. For a second, I thought he might recognize me from the DNA photos Sarah had shown him. But no, to a man like Cain, people like me weren't individuals. We were furniture. He walked over to my desk. He looked down at the mug of coffee I had just brewed. With a casual, deliberate flick of his wrist, he knocked it over. Dark, scalding liquid spilled across my keyboard, my notebooks, and the edge of my desk. The entire floor went dead silent. Benny, 2 desks over, stopped breathing. Victoria took a half-step forward, her face tight with suppressed fury, but she knew she couldn't intervene. Not with a Gu. Oops, Cain said. His voice was light, mocking. Clumsy me. You know, in turn, this whole floor is going to be gutted by Friday. New management. Which means you, and everyone else in this pathetic little room, are obsolete. He leaned in closer, his cologne smelling of expensive sandalwood and unearned arrogance. Clean it up, he whispered. Then pack your things. And do it fast, trash, before I have security throw you out the window. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the conference room, laughing with his lawyers. I sat perfectly still. I looked at the coffee dripping onto the carpet. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. Instead, a cold, familiar clarity washed over me. This was no longer a corporate negotiation. This was a territorial dispute. And in the wild, when a larger predator steps into your territory, you don't back down. You change the rules of the ecosystem. Ding. The sound was silent to everyone else, but it echoed in my skull like a gunshot. System alert. Hostile environment detected. Task 002. Neutralize the acquisition attempt and assert absolute dominance over the premises. Required expenditure, $50, 000,000. Time limit, 10 minutes. Reward, 5x cashback plus bonus asset. Untraceable corporate shell entity. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:14 a.m. I had until 10:24 a.m. I stood up. I didn't grab a towel to clean the coffee. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the matte black card. I walked past Benny. I walked past a stunned Victoria. I walked straight to the glass doors of the conference room and pushed them open. Cain was mid-sentence, berating the CEO of Apex. He stopped and glared at me. Did I stutter? Cain sneered. I said, pack your things. Get out. I'm not packing anything. I said, my voice perfectly level. But you are. Cain blinked, then let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I am Cain Gu. I am buying this building. I am buying this company. You are a nobody who cleans up spills. You're right, I said. I am a nobody. But you made a critical error in your cost-benefit analysis, Cain. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. I put it on speaker. It rang twice. Mr. Marcus, a deep, trembling voice answered. It was Mr. Henderson, the managing director of the commercial real estate firm that held the master lease for this entire building. A man who, 3 days ago, had signed the transfer documents making me the silent, majority shareholder of the property via a system-facilitated blind trust. Mr. Henderson, I said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. I'd like to execute the clause we discussed. Immediate termination of all subleases held by Gu family subsidiaries. And I want the Gu family's negotiation team escorted from the premises by building security. Now, there was a beat of absolute, suffocating silence in the room. Cain's smirk vanished. His face went pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. What is this? Who is this? This is a joke. You're an intern. Mr. Henderson's voice crackled through the speaker, firm and terrified of the man on the other end of the line. It is not a joke, Mr. Gu. The building has a new primary owner. Your access badges are currently being deactivated. Security is on the 20th floor as we speak. Cain stared at me. The arrogance was cracking, revealing the panicked, entitled child underneath. You can't do this. My family will sue. We will bury you. I stepped closer to him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Your family searches for lost children because they need something, I said softly, echoing the exact realization I'd had weeks ago. They think the transaction structure is in their favor. But you forgot one thing about the infrastructure of nothing, Cain. I tapped the black card against the mahogany table. The foundation always outlasts the penthouse. The conference room doors opened. 2 massive building security guards stepped in. They didn't look at the CEO. They didn't look at the lawyers. They looked directly at Cain. Mr. Gu, the lead guard said, you need to come with us. Cain looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and dawning, horrific comprehension. He didn't know how I had done it. He didn't know who I was. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just been checkmated by a ghost. As they escorted him out, the system chimed in my mind. Task 002 complete. Expenditure, $50, 000,000. Cashback multiplier, 5x. $250, 000,000 transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired, Omega Shell Corporation. I looked down at the spilled coffee on my desk. I had 10 minutes to neutralize a billionaire heir, and I had just made $250 million doing it. I picked up my ruined notebook, tossed it in the trash, and sat back down. I still had work to do, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't working for survival. I was working for the takeover. There is a distinct sound a room makes when the hierarchy shatters. It isn't a gasp. It isn't a scream. It's the sudden, absolute absence of ambient noise. The hum of the air conditioning, the click of keyboards, the nervous shuffling of feet. All of it stops, replaced by the heavy, suffocating weight of a paradigm shift. King Gu was gone, escorted out by building security like a common trespasser. I sat at my desk, watching the dark coffee stains slowly seep into the carpet. Victoria approached cautiously, her usual strict demeanor replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. "Marcus," she whispered, glancing at the empty conference room. What was that? Who was on the phone? I looked up at her. For 14 months, she had been the only manager who treated me like a human being rather than a disposable resource. She had covered for my missing credentials. She had taught me how to navigate corporate politics without getting eaten. "New management, Victoria," I said calmly. Effective immediately. I pulled out my phone and opened the newly acquired Omega Shell Corporation dashboard. With 3 taps, I initiated a wire transfer. "Check your personal account," I said. She pulled out her phone. Her eyes scanned the screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Marcus, this is $5 million. As a consulting bonus? From who?" "From the new majority shareholder of this building," I said. "Consider it hazard pay for dealing with the previous negotiation team. You're promoted to floor director. Double your salary. Effective today." I turned to Benny, who was still frozen at his desk, staring at his monitor. "Benny, you're IT lead now. Triple salary. Fix my keyboard." I didn't do this out of charity. Sentiment is a luxury good, and I was still running a lean operation. I did it because loyalty is the most undervalued asset in the corporate world, and I had just purchased theirs at a massive discount. Then, I packed my bag, walked out of Apex Solutions, and didn't look back. The pattern established itself over the following weeks with the terrifying regularity of a well-structured contract. The system issues a task. I spend. The cashback returns multiplied. Assets accumulate in my documentation. Task 003 required me to liquidate a luxury car dealership. Task 005 required the acquisition of a full executive fleet. I didn't drive the cars. I didn't wear the watches. I simply moved the capital, and the system rewarded me with exponential growth. I was building an infrastructure of power, brick by financial brick. Then came Task 006. Required expenditure, $100,000,000. Time limit, for hours. The Sioux Charity Auction was the most efficient, high-volume venue available to meet the quota. I attended not out of philanthropy, but out of mathematical necessity. I bought the Yuan Dynasty vase because it was correctly priced. I bought the ancient calligraphy because it was historically rare and held its value in a volatile market. But then, the auctioneer brought out Lot 42, the Phoenix Red Jade. When he held it up to the spotlight, the light passed through the stone, igniting it with a deep, internal fire. Something happened in my chest. A sharp, sudden ache that I didn't have a category for. It was a response that had nothing to do with asset valuation and everything to do with 20 years of never being permitted to experience beauty as a personal entitlement. For 2 decades, my world had been gray concrete, cold rain, and the metallic taste of survival. This stone was warm. It was alive. I bid $12 million. I won. I placed the jade on my desk at Starry Manor, where I could see it catch the morning light. I didn't try to analyze the feeling. I just noted that it was there. A tiny, illogical variable in my otherwise perfect equation. Then, the bodyguards arrived the morning after Task 007. Task 007 complete. $26.7 billion transferred to host account. Bonus, professional security detail, 7 personnel. At 7 a.m., 7 people in immaculate, tailored black suits materialized outside my front door and bowed in perfect, terrifying unison. I opened the door in my faded pajamas, holding a steaming cup of instant noodles. Old habits die hard. "No formalities," I said, taking a sip of the broth. "Come help me move some boxes." The woman at the front stepped forward. "Nova," she said. "Team coordinator." She mentioned, with the precise, offhand casualness of someone dropping a fact they know is unusual but have made peace with, that she had previously worked as a chef in what she called the gourmet dimension. I filed this under operational context unknown, functionally irrelevant, and handed her an apron. "Make breakfast." 20 minutes later, she placed a plate in front of me. It was a meal that completely reorganized my understanding of what food was capable of. It wasn't just calories. It was art. It was a symphony of seared duck breast, rich demi-glace, and textures that made my old survival rations feel like an insult to my digestive tract. I hired her on the spot. I hired all 7 of them. The following Saturday, a designated system rest day, meaning Cashback was inactive, I took the entire team to Prosper Plaza. I didn't just give them a bonus. I bought them wardrobes, heavy winter coats, durable, practical shoes, tailored suits that fit their frames perfectly. In the fitting rooms, 2 of the men cried quietly. They tried to hide it, turning their faces to the mirrors, shoulders shaking. They had spent their lives being treated as disposable weapons. For the first time, someone was treating them like human beings. I pretended not to notice. I stared intently at a rack of ties, giving them the privacy they desperately needed. It was the first money I had ever spent without expecting a single cent in return. No asset accumulation, no tactical advantage, just human decency. And it felt, to my genuine, startling surprise, like the best use of capital I had ever made. But as we left the plaza, I knew the quiet weeks were a temporary illusion. The Gu family's investigators were circling. They were connecting the dots between the phantom buyer of Apex Tower and the DNA test I had taken. I looked at Nova, who was already scanning the perimeter with sharp, predatory eyes. "Nova," I said, sliding my phone into my pocket. "Keep the team on standby. We have a new project." By 2 p.m., the Gu family estate was in a state of controlled panic. I didn't need to be in the room to know this. I had Omega Shell Corp's AI monitoring all Gu family press releases, stock fluctuations, and internal communications. Cain had thrown a tantrum, demanding to know how a mid-tier logistics firm had suddenly acquired the master lease to a prime commercial tower. Their lawyers were hitting a brick wall. Every time they tried to pierce the corporate veil of Omega Shell Corp, they found nothing but a labyrinth of offshore trusts and encrypted holding companies. But Sarah was smarter. She was the one quietly pulling the threads, realizing the timeline of the building acquisition aligned perfectly with a certain DNA test. Fear is a much more effective negotiator than blood. I let them sweat. I let them run the numbers and realize the math didn't add up. At 8 p.m., I was in the master suite of Starry Manor. Nova was in the kitchen, preparing a dinner that filled the air with the rich, earthy aroma of wild mushroom risotto and seared scallops. A level of culinary sophistication that still made my gutter-snipe brain short-circuit. "Your heart rate is elevated, boss," she called out, not looking up from her cutting board. "But your breathing is controlled. You are anticipating a conflict." "Just a shift in the market, Nova," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering skyline of Imperial City. Ding! The sound echoed in my skull, sharp and demanding. "System alert. Escalation protocol initiated. Task 008. The Gu family is hosting the Imperial City Charity Gala tonight at the Grand Imperial Hotel to salvage their corporate reputation and secure a critical merger. Objective: attend the gala. Outmaneuver the Gu family publicly. Seize control of the narrative. Required expenditure: $500 million. Time limit: 3 hours. Reward: 10x cashback plus bonus asset. The Grand Imperial Hotel absolute ownership." I stared at the floating text. $500 million. In 3 hours. "Nova," I said, turning away from the window. "Cancel dinner. I need you to assemble the team." She wiped her hands on a towel and walked into the room, her posture instantly shifting from gourmet chef to tactical coordinator. "What is the mission parameter?" "We are going to a gala," I said, "and we are going to buy the building we walk into." The preparation was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. I didn't have time to build a fake identity from scratch. Instead, I used Omega Shell Corp to purchase a controlling stake in a high-end, boutique event planning firm. Within an hour, I had legitimate, ironclad credentials as Marcus Vance, Senior Acquisitions Partner. At 10:30 p.m., a convoy of 3 black armored SUVs pulled up to the front of Starry Manor. I stepped out of the house. I was no longer wearing the proper clothes I had bought to correct my past. I was wearing a midnight blue, bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, tailored to the millimeter. It didn't just fit, it acted as armor. Nova stood by the lead vehicle, dressed in a sleek, tactical black evening gown that concealed a ceramic blade at her thigh and a comms earpiece. Behind her, 6 other members of the security detail stood at attention, disguised as high-end chauffeurs and personal assistants. "Boss," Nova said, opening the door. "The Grand Imperial Hotel is currently hosting 400 of Imperial City's elite. The Gu family has the main floor reserved. Security is tight." "Security is just another variable," I said, sliding into the leather seat. "And variables can be bought." The Grand Imperial Hotel was a monument to obscene wealth. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and an orchestra playing softly in the background. When our convoy pulled up to the red carpet, the valets scrambled. The sight of 3 armored SUVs arriving in perfect synchronization drew immediate attention. I stepped out. Nova flanked my right side. The rest of the team formed a subtle, impenetrable perimeter around me. We walked through the grand doors. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted instantly. Whispers rippled through the crowd. People recognized the intensity of the security detail, even if they didn't recognize me. And then, I saw them. The Gu family was holding court near the center of the room. Arthur stood tall, projecting patriarchal authority. Sarah was scanning the room, her eyes sharp and calculating. And Cain was by the bar, looking sullen, nursing a drink, his ego still bruised from his humiliation at Apex Solutions. I didn't head for the bar. I didn't head for the Gu family. I walked straight to the event manager, a sweating man in a tuxedo who was frantically trying to coordinate the evening's silent auction. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise with absolute clarity. The manager turned, annoyed. "Sir, this is a private, invite only." I held up the matte black card. "I am Marcus Vance, representing Omega Holdings. I am here to settle the outstanding venue balance for the evening and to execute the purchase agreement for this property." The manager blinked. He looked at the card. He looked at my face. He looked at the 7 highly trained professionals standing silently behind me. I need to verify this with the owner," he stammered. "The owner," I said, leaning in just a fraction, "is about to have a very interesting conversation with me. Page Mr. Gu. Tell him the ghost from the 20th floor has arrived." The manager swallowed hard and hurried away. I turned slowly, scanning the room. Across the sea of champagne flutes and designer gowns, Sarah Gu locked eyes with me. Her glass stopped halfway to her lips. The color drained from her face. She nudged Arthur, pointing discreetly in my direction. Arthur turned. His eyes narrowed, scanning my tailored suit, my posture, the sheer, unapologetic authority radiating from a boy he had dismissed as a gutter rat just weeks ago. Cain followed their gaze. When he saw me, his drink slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. The orchestra kept playing. The crowd kept murmuring. But in the center of the Grand Imperial Hotel, the war had officially begun. Ding. System. Expenditure initiated. Prepare for acquisition. I smiled. It was time to balance the ledger. The sound of shattering glass is the starting pistol of a war. Cain's tumbler hit the marble floor, splashing amber liquid across his polished Oxfords. He didn't move to clean it. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his brain struggling to reconcile the gutter rat he had mocked weeks ago with the man in the midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo, flanked by a private army. Across the room, Arthur Gu's posture stiffened. Sarah's eyes narrowed into razor-sharp slits. They didn't know my alias, but they knew the energy. They knew a predator when they saw one. I didn't walk toward them. I walked past them, my security detail parting the sea of stunned socialites like a wedge of ice. I approached the event manager, a sweating man in a tuxedo whose clipboard rattled in his trembling hands. "Sir," he stammered, I ran the card. The bank didn't just approve it. They rolled out a red carpet. "But sir, this is the Imperial City Heritage Gala. The Gu family is the primary sponsor. You can't just—" "I'm not here to disrupt the gala," I said, my voice low, calm, and carrying perfectly over the sudden hush of the room. "I'm here to upgrade it." I glanced toward the stage. The evening's main event was about to begin, a public pledge drive to secure the city's new infrastructure contract. Arthur Gu was scheduled to go up in 2 minutes to announce a generous $50 million donation, a move designed to cement his family's political leverage and secure a critical merger. $50 million. A drop in the bucket for them. A flex meant to crush mid-tier competitors. "Get me the microphone," I said. The manager hesitated, looking toward Arthur. I didn't wait. I stepped onto the stage. Nova and two of my guards silently took positions at the base of the stairs, ensuring no one could follow me. The orchestra faltered, then stopped. For 100 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Arthur Goose stepped forward, his patriarchal authority kicking in. "Young man," he boomed, his voice dripping with condescending grace. "This is a private function for the city's benefactors. If you're lost, the exit is behind you." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the silver hair, the tailored suit, the man who had looked at me in a sterile clinic and felt nothing but disappointment. "I'm not lost, Arthur," I said. The use of his first name, without a title, sent a ripple of shock through the front row. "And I'm not here to be a benefactor. I'm here to correct a market inefficiency." I turned to the crowd. I didn't shout. I didn't need to perform. I spoke with the flat, absolute certainty of a man reading a balance sheet. "My name is Marcus Vance, representing Omega Holdings," I announced. "The Gu family is about to pledge $50 million to this city's infrastructure fund. A commendable effort, but it's insufficient." I pulled the matte black card from my pocket and held it up. The stage lights caught its edge. "On behalf of Omega Holdings, I am pledging $500 million to be wired to the city's account before midnight tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 400 wealthy minds simultaneously short-circuiting. $500 million. It wasn't just a donation. It was an obliteration. It was a financial nuclear strike designed to make the Gu family's $50 million look like loose change found in a couch cushion. Arthur's face went pale, then flushed a deep, violent crimson. Sarah grabbed his arm, her own eyes wide with a mixture of horror and frantic calculation. Cain looked like he might be sick. $500 million. The mayor, who was sitting in the front row, stammered, standing up. "Mr. Vance, that is unprecedented. Are you certain?" "The funds are already in escrow," I said smoothly. "The only condition is that the city terminates its pending exclusive negotiations with Gu Logistics, effective immediately. The contract will be open to competitive, transparent bidding." The mayor didn't even hesitate. Greed is a powerful motivator, and $500 million is impossible to refuse. "Done." I handed the microphone back to the stunned event manager. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said to the room. I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back at the Gu family. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, a mixture of fury, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying realization. As I stepped out of the hotel's grand doors and into the cool night air, the sound in my skull returned. Ding. System alert. Task 008 complete. Expenditure, $500 million. Cashback multiplier, 10x. $5 billion transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired. The Grand Imperial Hotel, 100% equity, debt-free. $5 billion. I sat in the back of the armored SUV, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. My heart rate was a steady 65 beats per minute. "Boss," Nova said from the front seat, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "That was a masterstroke. But you just declared open war on the most powerful family in Imperial City. They will not let this stand." "I know," I said. "Let them try." But as the SUV pulled into the underground garage of Starry Manor, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a system notification. It was a text message. From Arthur Gu. I opened it. There were no threats. No legal jargon. Just a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of the front gate of Starry Manor. Taken tonight. From the outside, through the trees. Beneath it, a single line of text. "You have your mother's eyes, Marcus, but you have my enemies. And I always bury my enemies." I stared at the screen. The primal, tactical alertness snapped back into place. He knew. The DNA test, the sudden wealth, the hostile takeover. He had connected the dots. He didn't just see a rival businessman anymore. He saw the son he had discarded, returning to burn his empire to the ground. I deleted the message. I walked into the manor, where the rich, savory scent of searing thyme and caramelized shallots greeted me. Nova was already on her secure comms line, her voice a low, deadly whisper. "Boss, we have a perimeter breach. 3 unmarked vehicles are slowing down on the access road." I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up a chef's knife, and tested its weight in my hand. It felt balanced. It felt real. "Let them come," I said softly. The infrastructure of nothing had protected me for 20 years. Now, It was time to see if the infrastructure of $5 billion could protect me from my own father. I set the chef's knife down on the marble island. I didn't need it. That was the entire point of having a security detail. If I had to use a knife, I had already failed as an asset manager. Status, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the kitchen. Nova's finger pressed against her earpiece. Her eyes were fixed on the security monitors mounted on the wall, displaying the winding, tree-lined access road to Starry Manor. 3 black SUVs. No plates. Tinted windows. They're moving slow, testing the perimeter sensors, she reported, her tone entirely devoid of panic. They are not municipal police. They are not private security. They are cleaners. Gu family. Almost certainly, Nova said. Arthur Gu doesn't send lawyers when he's this angry. He sends problems. I walked over to the monitors. The vehicles had stopped just outside the main iron gates. Men were stepping out. They moved with a coordinated, predatory grace. They weren't here to talk. They were here to send a message, and messages like that usually involved fire, broken glass, and a body. In my old life, this was the part where I ran. I would have slipped out the back, into the rain, into the concrete, hoping my footprint was small enough to be overlooked. But I wasn't in the concrete anymore. I was in the penthouse. And the penthouse has rules. Ding. The sound in my skull was sharp, demanding, and perfectly timed. System alert. Imminent physical threat detected. Task 009. Neutralize the intrusion without drawing law enforcement. Acquire the opposing force's operational intelligence. Required expenditure, $10 million. Time limit, 5 minutes. Reward, 5x cashback plus bonus asset. The intruder's absolute loyalty. I looked at the timer in my mind's eye. 5 minutes. Nova, I said, turning away from the screens. Do not engage. Do not fire a single shot. Open the main gate. Nova paused. For the first time since I'd hired her, I saw a flicker of hesitation. Boss, if I open that gate, they will be on the front porch in 40 seconds. I know, I said. Open it. Then have the team stand down. I want them in the courtyard, hands visible, weapons holstered. She held my gaze for a second, searching for any sign of a bluff. She found none. Understood, she said, tapping her comms. Stand down. Open the gate. I walked out of the kitchen, through the grand foyer, and pushed open the massive timber front doors. I stepped out onto the covered porch, into the crisp, midnight chill. Behind me, 7 of the most lethal security professionals in the city stood in a relaxed, V-shaped formation. They looked like expensive, highly trained statues. 30 seconds later, the 3 SUVs rolled through the open gates and fanned out in the circular driveway. The doors opened. 6 men stepped out. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, but their faces were exposed. They were professionals. At their center was a man in his late 40s, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow and eyes that had seen too much violence to be easily startled. He stopped 10 feet from the porch. He looked at my guards. Then he looked at me, standing there in a $500,000 tuxedo, holding nothing but a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. You're a hard man to find, Marcus, the scarred man said. His voice was like gravel in a blender. Arthur sends his regards. And his final warning. Leave the city by morning, or the next visit won't be a conversation. I took a slow sip of my water. Let me guess, I said. Arthur is paying you $50,000 for this little field trip? Maybe 100, if you manage to burn the East Wing. The man's jaw tightened. He didn't confirm or deny it. I'm going to make you a counteroffer, I continued, my voice carrying perfectly in the silent night. $10 million. Transferred to an offshore account of your choosing, right now. Untraceable. Tax-free. The man blinked. The men behind him shifted, their hands twitching toward their jackets. And in return, the scarred man asked, his voice dangerously low. In return, you and your team turn around, get back in your vehicles, and leave, I said. And tomorrow morning, you report to Nova here. Your new salary will be $200,000 a month per man, plus full medical, housing, and a discretionary budget for equipment. You will work for me. The silence that followed was heavier than the one at the gala. The scarred man stared at me. He was running the math. He knew who Arthur Gu was. He knew the kind of money the Gu family had. But he also knew that Arthur Gu viewed his operatives as expendable tools. Tools that got broken were thrown away. I was offering them a kingdom. Who are you? The man asked, the hostility in his voice replaced by a sharp, calculating awe. I'm the new management, I said. The transfer is already processing. Check your phone. The man pulled out his personal cell. He looked at the screen. His eyes widened. He looked back at me. Then slowly, deliberately, he holstered his weapon. He reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a matte black encrypted burner phone, and held it out to me. A peace offering. A surrender of his operational comms. I took it. He turned to his men. Stand down. He looked back at me and gave a single, respectful nod. My name is Silas. We'll see you at 0800 hours, boss. They got back into their SUVs. They didn't speed away. They drove out of the gates with the quiet, professional discipline of men who had just been promoted from mercenaries to executives. I turned and walked back inside, closing the front doors behind me, and set Silas's burner phone on the kitchen island. Ding. System alert. Task 009 complete. Expenditure, $10 million. Cashback multiplier, 5x, $50 million transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired, Tactical Intelligence Network, formerly GU Family Operations. Nova was waiting in the foyer, a faint, impressed smile playing on her lips. That was highly unorthodox, boss. It was a cost-benefit analysis, I replied, walking back toward the kitchen. Arthur Gu thinks power is about fear. But fear is a depreciating asset. Loyalty, bought at the right price, compounds indefinitely. I picked up my phone. I opened my messages and found Arthur's previous text. I took a photo of Silas's burner phone resting on my marble island, the screen displaying the $10 million deposit notification. I attached the photo to a reply and hit send. No text, no threats, just the receipt. Let him look at it. Let him realize that the very weapon he sent to break me is now sitting in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, and plotting his downfall. Arthur Gu thought he was fighting his son. He didn't realize he was fighting a balance sheet. And the ledger was finally about to balance. The silence in my kitchen at 7 a.m. wasn't empty. It was the heavy, expectant quiet of a predator waiting for the market to open. I watched that quiet settle over the room as Silas, the man who had come to burn my house down 12 hours ago, sat at my marble island. He was drinking black coffee from a Gucci mug, reviewing a digital dossier on a secure tablet. He wore a crisp, tailored suit that Nova had procured at dawn. He looked less like a mercenary and more like a senior partner at a private equity firm, because that's exactly what he was now. Arthur Gu called an emergency board meeting at Gu Tower, Silas said, not looking up from the screen. 8 o'clock. They're trying to contain the fallout from your $500 million donation last night. They're panicking. The stock is down 12% in pre-market trading. Good, I said, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal suit. Panic makes people sell. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. Ding. The sound in my skull was no longer a surprise. It was the opening bell. System alert. Hostile environment detected. Task 010. Infiltrate Gu Tower. Execute a hostile takeover of Gu Logistics during the emergency board meeting. Required expenditure, $100 million. Time limit, 60 minutes. Reward, 10x cashback plus bonus asset, the Gu family's private ledger. $100 million. 60 minutes. I looked at Silas. Can your former colleagues get us to the 50th floor of Gu Tower without triggering their internal security? Silas finally looked up. A slow, predatory smile spread across his scarred face. Boss, I helped design their internal security. We won't just get you to the 50th floor. We'll get you into the boardroom before they even know the elevator has moved. Gu Tower was a monolith of black glass and steel, piercing the smog of Imperial City like a dagger. It was the physical manifestation of Arthur Gu's ego. At 7:45 a.m., our convoy pulled into the underground executive garage. I didn't sneak in through the loading docks. I didn't hack the service elevators. I walked straight to the private executive elevator, flanked by Silas and 2 of his most trusted men. When the biometric scanner flashed red, denying me access, Silas simply stepped forward, placed his thumb on the reader, and held up a cloned executive keycard he had lifted from a Gu family VP the night before. The light turned green. The doors slid open. We stepped inside. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. 49 floors. I watched the numbers tick upward on the digital display. My pulse didn't spike. A steady 60 beats per minute. I wasn't nervous. I was calibrating. For 20 years, I had looked up at this building from the gutters, wondering what kind of gods lived in the clouds. Today, I was going up there to evict them. Ding. 4:50. The doors opened directly into the antechamber of the main boardroom. Through the frosted glass, I could hear the muffled, frantic voices of the Gu family. Unacceptable. Who is this Omega Holdings? I want them investigated, audited, and destroyed. That was Arthur. His voice was tight, fraying at the edges. We're trying, Father, Sarah replied, her tone clipped and stressed. But their corporate structure is a ghost, and the minority shareholders are spooked. They're dumping stock, then buy it back. At any price. Arthur snapped. I didn't knock. I pushed the soundproof boardroom doors open and stepped into the room. The arguing stopped instantly. 5 people sat around a massive, polished mahogany table. Arthur at the head, Sarah to his right, Cain to his left, looking pale and sweating through his shirt. 2 older board members sat at the far end, looking utterly bewildered. Arthur slowly turned his head. When his eyes landed on me, the color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. Security. Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the table. How did this gutter rat get in here? Silas stepped into the room behind me, closing the doors with a soft, definitive click. He didn't draw a weapon. He just stood there, arms crossed, radiating absolute, terrifying authority. The 2 older board members recognized Silas immediately. Their eyes widened in horror. They knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, they knew who he used to work for. Your security works for me now, Arthur, I said, my voice slicing through the room's panic like a scalpel. Sit down. Arthur stared at me, his chest heaving. For a moment, I thought he might have a stroke. Then, a cold, calculating rage replaced the shock. You think a parlor trick makes you powerful, boy? Arthur sneered, leaning forward. You bought a building. You bought a few thugs. But you are nothing. You are a stray dog wearing a tailored suit. And I will have you dissected. Let's talk about Gu logistics, I said, ignoring his threat entirely. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. Your flagship subsidiary. The backbone of your empire. What about it? Sarah asked, her eyes darting between me and Silas, her mind racing to connect the dots. About 20 minutes ago, I said, pulling out my phone and tapping the screen, the minority shareholders of Gu Logistics began to panic. The Gala incident spooked them. They started selling. I looked up, meeting Arthur's gaze. I bought every single share they dumped. Through a series of shell companies, of course. But the transaction cleared at 7:58 a.m. I slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It was the official transfer of ownership, stamped and verified by the SEC. As of 2 minutes ago, I said softly, Omega Holdings owns 51% of Gu Logistics, which means I am the majority shareholder, which means I am your boss. The quiet that followed was suffocating. It was the sound of an empire cracking down the middle. Cain let out a choked, pathetic sound. Sarah stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. Arthur didn't look at the paper. He looked at me. His eyes were no longer angry. They were dead. You think this is a victory? Arthur whispered. You think you've won? I don't think, I replied. I calculate. And the math says I just won. Ding. System alert. Task 010 complete. Expenditure, $100 million. Cashback multiplier, 10x. $1 billion transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired. The Gu family's private ledger. A new file appeared in my mind. Encrypted. Massive. Containing 2 decades of off-the-books transactions, bribes, shell companies, and buried secrets that could send the entire Gu family to federal prison for the rest of their lives. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. I'll be in touch regarding the new operational directives for Gu Logistics, I said to the room. I suggest you all start updating your resumes. I turned and walked toward the door. Marcus, Arthur's voice stopped me. It was quiet, stripped of all its patriarchal bluster. I paused, my hand on the brass doorknob, but I didn't turn around. Your mother, Arthur said, his voice cracking just a fraction. She didn't abandon you. She was forced to leave you, to protect you. I froze. The tactical ice in my mind fractured. Just for a microsecond. From what? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Arthur didn't answer. He just stared at me, a strange, tragic mixture of pity and fear in his eyes. Check the ledger, Marcus, he whispered. Check the ledger, and you will wish you had stayed in the gutter. I walked out of the boardroom. The elevator doors closed behind me. I stood in the descending metal box, my heart hammering against my ribs for the first time in weeks. I opened the newly acquired private ledger in my mind's eye. I bypassed the financial records. I searched for my mother's name, Eleanor Gu. I opened the file. There was a single audio recording attached, dated 20 years ago. I pressed play. The voice that filled my head wasn't Arthur's. It wasn't Sarah's. It was my mother's. And she wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was giving the order to have me killed. The elevator doors slid open to the lobby. The chilled, recycled air of Gu Tower hit my face, but I couldn't feel it. All I could hear was the echo in my mind. It was a woman's voice. Cold, precise, devoid of any warmth, yet undeniably familiar. It was the voice I had imagined 1,000 times, hoping for an apology, a tear, a reason. Instead, I got an audit. The boy is a liability to the succession. The recording crackled in my memory, dated exactly 20 years and 2 months ago. If the bloodline is verified, the trust dissolves. Arthur's claim is void. Terminate the asset. Make it look like an accident in the lower districts. No witnesses. Terminate the asset. Not my son. Not the baby. The asset. My pulse didn't spike. My fingers remained perfectly still. For 20 years, I had built my entire psychological infrastructure on a single, foundational belief. I was abandoned. I was a victim of circumstance, left to rot in the gutters while my biological parents lived in the clouds. That belief had fueled my hunger. It had justified my ruthlessness. But I was wrong. I wasn't abandoned. I was hunted, and the hunter wore diamonds and smiled for the business press. I walked out of the building, past the stunned doorman, and into the back of the waiting armored SUV. Silas was in the driver's seat. Nova was in the passenger seat, her eyes immediately locking onto mine in the rearview mirror. She saw the shift. She didn't know the data, but she recognized the change in atmospheric pressure. The air in the car had turned to ice. "Boss?" she asked quietly. "Drive," I said. "Take us to the manor." And lock down all external communications. By the time we reached Starry Manor, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the manicured lawns. I went straight to the sub-basement. It was a room I had discovered on my first day of ownership, lined with server racks and soundproofed walls. A perfect war room. I sat at the central console, Silas and Nova flanking me. "Decrypt the rest of the private ledger," I said. My voice was flat. "Dead. Focus on Eleanor Gu. Cross-reference the audio file with all financial transfers, legal documents, and private communications from the year I was born." Nova's fingers flew across the keyboard. Silas stood by the door, a silent, imposing sentinel. "Decrypting," Nova said. "The encryption is military grade, boss. But the system's backdoor is bypassing it. Give me 10 seconds. 5 seconds later, the main screen flooded with data. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the documents at a speed that would blur for a normal person. Contracts, shell companies, offshore accounts, and then the smoking gun. The Eleanor Gu Philanthropic Trust. It was her crown jewel. The public relations masterpiece that kept the Gu family's reputation polished while they ruthlessly crushed competitors. The trust operated the city's premier medical facilities, orphanages, and community centers. It was the shield that made them untouchable. I looked at the funding structure. The trust was heavily subsidized by Gu Medical Holdings, the very company I now controlled 51% of. A grim, bloodless smile touched my lips. Grief is a liability. It clouds judgment. It makes you sloppy. I didn't have the luxury of grief. I had a balance sheet to correct. Ding. The chime in my mind didn't just echo. It struck like a judge's gavel. System alert. Retribution protocol initiated. Task 011. Dismantle the target's primary source of public influence. Objective. Execute a hostile takeover of Gu Medical Holdings. Required expenditure, $250 million. Time limit, 2 hours. Reward, 10x cashback plus bonus asset. Absolute media blackout immunity, $250 million. 2 hours. "Nova," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. "Give me the contact information for the 3 largest financial news networks in the country. And get me the current board of directors for the Gu Medical Holdings Group." Silas frowned. "We're going after the charity, boss? That's going to make us look like monsters in the press." "Let them look," I said softly. "I grew up in the gutters those charities pretend to care about. It's time they actually serve the people who live there." The takeover was a surgical act of corporate violence. At 8 p.m., the GU Medical Holdings Board was holding a routine virtual meeting. At 8:05 p.m., I used Omega Shell Corp to initiate a cascade of buy orders, snapping up every available share of their parent company on the open market. The system's capital flowed like a tidal wave, overwhelming their defenses. At 8:15 p.m., their trading was halted. At 8:30 p.m., I sent a single, company-wide email to all 5,000 employees of the GU Medical Network. Subject: change in management. Effective immediately, Omega Holdings is the majority shareholder of GU Medical. All ties to the Eleanor GU Philanthropic Trust are severed. All funds previously allocated to downtown private facilities are hereby redirected to constructing 3 new, fully funded trauma centers in the lower districts. Welcome to the new management. By 9 p.m., the financial news networks were in a frenzy. The headline on every screen was the same. Mystery billionaire seizes GU family charity, diverts billions to slums. I sat in the dark of the sub-basement, watching the chaos unfold on the monitors. I picked up my phone. I found Eleanor GU's direct, private number in the ledger. I didn't call her. I sent a text. Attached was a screenshot of the news headline and a single line of text. You ordered the asset terminated. Instead, the asset just bought the house you built on its grave. I hit send. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the specific, terrifying release of tension that comes when you finally stop running from the monster and realize you have become something much, much worse. Eleanor GU had tried to write off a liability to protect her trust. She didn't realize she had just forged the instrument of her own bankruptcy, and the liquidation was just beginning. I expected panic. When you drop a financial nuclear strike on someone's legacy, you expect screaming lawyers, frantic press conferences, and desperate, late-night phone calls begging for a settlement. I got none of that. For 24 hours after I seized control of the GU Medical Holdings Group, there was an absolute, ringing void from the GU family estate. No public statements. No leaked threats. No retaliatory lawsuits. In the world of high-stakes capital, silence isn't peace. Silence is the sound of a trap being set. I sat in the sub-basement war room of Starry Manor, staring at the wall of monitors. My pulse remained a flat, steady rhythm, but my mind was running simulations at a fever pitch. "Boss," Nova said, breaking the quiet. She was standing by the door, her tablet held tightly in both hands. "We have a problem. It's not an attack. It's a surrender." I frowned. "Explain." "Eleanor GU just held a press conference," Nova said, tapping the screen to bring up the live feed. "She didn't fight the takeover. She publicly endorsed it." I leaned forward. On the screen, Eleanor stood at a podium. She looked immaculate, composed, and utterly unreadable. "The redirection of funds to the lower districts is a necessary correction," Eleanor said to the flashing cameras, her voice smooth and authoritative. "Omega Holdings has my full support in this transition. In fact, to ensure a seamless handover, I have voluntarily triggered the founder's liability clause in the corporate charter." My blood ran cold. "Nova," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "pull up the founder's liability clause." She typed furiously. A dense legal document appeared on the main screen. I scanned it in seconds, and the trap revealed itself in all its brutal, elegant complexity. By triggering the clause, Eleanor had legally bound the new majority shareholder, me, to assume personal, unlimited financial liability for all historical medical malpractice lawsuits filed against GU Medical over the last 2 decades. There were hundreds of them, dormant, buried, but legally valid. "If you refuse to accept the liability," Nova said, reading the implications, "the regulatory board will freeze the new trauma centers you just promised to build. If you do accept it, you will be tied up in endless litigation, and your personal assets will be exposed to predatory lawsuits." She's not trying to take my money, I realized, staring at the screen. She's trying to bury me in bureaucracy. She's making me look like a reckless corporate raider who doesn't care about the patients. It was a brilliant, brutal maneuver. Ruthless. Calculated. Exactly what I would have done. "Boss," Silas said from the corner of the room. "Do we countersue? We can freeze her personal accounts." "No," I said, rubbing my temples. "That's what she wants. She wants a war of attrition. Find me the origin of those malpractice suits. I want to know who is funding the plaintiffs. Nova's fingers flew across the keyboard, diving into the encrypted depths of the private ledger I had acquired. She bypassed firewalls, decrypted shell companies, and traced the money. 10 minutes later, she stopped. "Boss," she said, her voice laced with genuine confusion. "The money trail. It doesn't make sense." "What do you mean?" "The plaintiff's legal fees aren't being funded by the Board of Elders. They aren't being funded by rival corporations." She turned the monitor toward me. "They're being funded by a blind trust. A trust that has been quietly paying off these settlements out of pocket for 20 years to keep them out of the public eye." I looked at the trust registration. It was anonymous, but the digital signature at the bottom of the authorization logs was unmistakable. Egu. My brain stalled. Why would the woman who ordered my death spend 2 decades quietly paying off medical lawsuits to protect the reputation of a company she supposedly wanted to destroy? Why shield the very institution I was currently attacking? "Keep digging," I ordered, my voice tight. "Find the oldest file in that trust. The first one she ever paid off." Nova worked for another minute. "Got it. Dated 20 years and 1 month ago. A pediatric emergency room visit in the Narrows." She pulled up the redacted medical intake form. "Patient, unidentified male child. Approximate age, 9. Condition, severe malnutrition, lacerations consistent with animal attack, exposure. Treatment, full surgical repair, nutritional rehabilitation, 30-day inpatient observation. Billing status, paid in full. Anonymous donor." I stopped breathing. I knew that intake form. I knew the smell of the antiseptic in that specific clinic. I knew the feeling of waking up in a clean bed with my sides stitched up, a full stomach for the first time in weeks, and a social worker telling me I could stay as long as I needed. I had always assumed it was a random act of bureaucratic mercy, but it wasn't random. The anonymous donor who paid for my life, who kept that specific clinic open when the city tried to shut it down, who quietly buried every legal threat that could have exposed a vulnerable, nameless street kid, was Eleanor Gu. Ding. My phone vibrated on the desk. It wasn't a system notification. It was an incoming call. The caller ID displayed a single name, Eleanor Gu. I stared at the screen. The ruthless, calculating survivor in me screamed to let it go to voicemail. But the boy who had fought a dog for a hamburger, the boy who needed to know the truth of the balance sheet, reached out and tapped the green icon. I put it on speaker. "Hello, Marcus," her voice said. It wasn't the sterile, robotic tone from the 20-year-old recording. It was warm, tired, and terrifyingly sharp. "You played a good move today, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "But I see the trap. The liability clause won't work." "I know it won't," she replied smoothly. "You're too smart for that. You'll find a loophole, just like you found the shell companies. Just like you bought the tower. Then why do it?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the edge of the desk. "Why try to bury me in lawsuits? Why fund the clinic in the Narrows for 20 years if you wanted me dead?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a clock ticking in her office. "You are looking at the board, Marcus," she said softly. "But you are misidentifying the players. You think you are fighting me. You are not." "Then who am I fighting?" "The wolves," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "The wolves I have been holding back from your door for 20 years. You just kicked the door open, and now they can smell your blood." "Stop speaking in riddles," I snapped. "I am not the one who ordered your termination, Marcus," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "I am the one who paid the man who smuggled you out. And if you continue to blindly attack me, you will give the Board of Elders exactly the opening they need to finish what they started." The line went dead. I stood in the silent war room, the hum of the servers suddenly deafening. Terminate the asset. I had interpreted it as a death order. But what if it was a code? What if it was a performance, spoken into a room she knew was tapped by the board? My entire foundation of revenge was built on a single 10-second audio clip. And for the first time in my life, my cost-benefit analysis was failing. Ding. System alert. Narrative anomaly detected. Task 012. The Board of Elders is mobilizing. They have identified Martha, landlord, Apex District, as a point of leverage. Objective: secure the asset before the cleaners arrive. Required expenditure: $5 million. Time limit: 45 minutes. The analytical freeze snapped back into place, but this time, it was directed outward. The Goof family wasn't the enemy. The board was. And they were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. They were going after Martha. "Nova," I said, grabbing my jacket. "Get the cars." The convoy tore through Imperial City like a blade through silk. 3 armored SUVs, running lights red, weaving through traffic with the precision of a surgical strike. Nova was in the lead vehicle with me. Silas was in the second, coordinating with the rest of the team. "ETA is 12 minutes, Nova said, her eyes locked on the GPS, "but the cleaners are already on site. We have thermal confirmation of 3 hostiles inside the building." My jaw tightened. Martha's building was a 6-story walk-up in the Apex district. No elevator, no security, just narrow hallways, flickering lights, and the smell of old cooking oil and damp concrete. It was the kind of place where people disappeared and no one noticed for weeks. It was the very sort of building I had called home. "Silas," I said into the comms, "I want 2 men on the roof. 2 at the rear exit. Nova and I go through the front. No lethal force unless absolutely necessary. I want them alive. I want to know who sent them." "Copy that, boss," Silas replied. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man who had done this 1,000 times. But I wasn't calm. My heart rate was climbing. 68, 72, 75. For 20 years, I had run the math on every situation. I had calculated the caloric value of a hamburger against the fighting weight of a stray dog. I had assessed the structural integrity of a trash bag as a wind barrier. But I had never calculated the cost of losing the only person who had ever called me son. We screeched to a halt in front of the building at 11:47 p.m. The street was empty. The lights in Martha's apartment were off, but I could see movement in the 3rd-floor window. Her window. I was out of the SUV before it fully stopped. Nova was right behind me, her hand resting on the ceramic blade concealed at her thigh. "Stay here," I told her. "I'm going up." "Boss, that's tactically unsound," she said, her voice sharp. "Let the team clear the building." "No," I said, already moving toward the entrance. "This is my house. I know every creak in those stairs. I know which floorboards are loose. If I send your men in, the cleaners will hear them coming from a block away." I pushed open the front door. The smell hit me instantly. Old paint, damp wood, the faint, metallic tang of the radiator that never worked properly in winter. It smelled like home. I took the stairs 2 at a time, moving silently, my body remembering the rhythm it had learned over 14 months of climbing these exact steps. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. I could hear voices now. Low, professional. The voices of men who knew how to make problems disappear. I reached the 3rd-floor landing and pressed my back against the wall, listening. 2 men outside Martha's door. One inside. "Told you, she doesn't know anything." A voice growled from inside the apartment. "Just grab her and let's go. Boss wants her alive." "For now," another voice replied. "But if the kid shows up, we eliminate her. Clean and quiet." A spike of pure adrenaline hit my veins. They were going to use her as bait. I looked at Nova, who had followed me up. She gave me a single, sharp nod. I didn't wait. I kicked the door open with everything I had. It slammed into the first cleaner, knocking him off balance. Nova was already moving, her ceramic blade flashing in the dim hallway light. She disarmed the second man with a precision strike to his wrist, then drove her knee into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping. I stepped into the apartment. The third cleaner was standing over Martha, who was backed against the kitchen counter, her face pale, her hands trembling. He had a gun. He turned toward me, raising the weapon. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I moved. I closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbing his gun hand and twisting it hard. The gun clattered to the floor. I drove my elbow into his face, once, twice, 3 times. He crumpled. Silence. I stood there, breathing hard, my knuckles split and bleeding. Martha stared at me, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. "Marcus," she whispered. I turned to her. The ruthless, untouchable billionaire vanished. The corporate raider disappeared. I was just a kid again. The kid who had paid his rent 3 days early every month because he didn't know how to say thank you. "Martha," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you." She didn't care about the blood on my hands. She didn't care about the 3 unconscious men on the floor. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. "You idiot," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "You absolute idiot. I thought you were dead." I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, the tension in my chest released. I'm not dead, I said. Not yet. 10 minutes later, Silas's team had the 3 cleaners bound and gagged in the living room. Nova was running a quick diagnostic on them, checking for wires or trackers. Martha sat on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands, still shaking slightly. I knelt in front of her. I need to get you out of here, I said. Tonight. Somewhere they can't find you. She looked at me, her eyes sharp despite the fear. Marcus, what is happening? Who are these men? Why are they after me? I hesitated. How do you tell the woman who raised you that her life is in danger because you declared war on the most powerful family in the city? It's complicated, I said. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, rough, real. Marcus, she said softly, I don't care about the complicated. I care about you. You're my son, and I'm not letting you face this alone. My throat tightened. I'm not asking you to face it alone, I said. I'm asking you to let me protect you. Please. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said, but you're buying me a new coat. This one smells like fear. I almost laughed. Almost. Deal, I said. I stood up and walked over to the bound cleaners. I crouched down in front of the leader, the one who had been inside the apartment. Who sent you? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. He spat blood on the floor. Go to hell, kid. I grabbed his collar and pulled him close. I grew up in these streets, I said. I know how to make people talk, and I have a very large budget for making people talk. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Who sent you? He stared at me. Then his eyes flicked to Nova, who was holding a small, wicked-looking knife. The board, he said. The board of elders. They said you were a threat to the succession. They said to eliminate anyone connected to you. I let him go and stood up. The board of elders. The hidden players. The ones Eleanor had warned me about. Nova, I said. Get Martha out of here. Take her to the manor. Lock it down. Where are you going? She asked. I looked at the unconscious cleaners. Then I looked at Martha, who was being helped to her feet by 2 of Silas's men. I have a meeting, I said. With my mother. As the convoy pulled away from the apartment building, I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. Ding. System alert. Task 012 complete. Expenditure, $5 million. Cashback multiplier, 5x. $25 million transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired. Absolute loyalty of Martha. Found family protocol activated. I almost smiled. The system was learning. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about building something that couldn't be bought, only earned. I pulled out my phone and dialed Eleanor Gu's number. It rang once. Marcus, she said. Her voice was calm. Expectant. You were right, I said. The board sent the cleaners. They went after Martha. There was a pause on the other end. Is she safe? Eleanor asked. I blinked. Of all the questions she could have asked, that was the one she chose. She's safe, I said. I got to her in time. Good, Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, relieved. That's good. I sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of that sink in. The woman I had tried to destroy, the woman I had believed ordered my death. She was worried about Martha. Eleanor, I said slowly. Why did you really call me? Another pause. Because you're running out of time, she said. The board knows you have the private ledger. They know you're getting close to the truth. And they're going to do something desperate. What kind of desperate? They're going to activate the Scorched Earth Protocol, she said. They're going to burn everything to the ground. The company. The family. You. I gripped the phone tighter. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why help me? Her voice was quiet. Sad. Because you're my son, she said. And I've spent 20 years pretending you were dead. I'm done pretending. The line went dead. I sat in the back of the SUV, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. The gutters had taught me how to survive. But the ties of blood and chosen family were teaching me something else entirely. They were teaching me how to fight for something worth saving. Eleanor Gu chose the meeting location herself. Not the family estate. Not a neutral corporate boardroom. Not some secluded villa where her security could sweep for bugs. She chose a 24-hour diner in the lower districts. The sort of place with flickering neon signs, vinyl booths patched with duct tape, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. It was the exact sort of establishment billionaires avoided, which was exactly why she had chosen it. You're late, she said when I walked in at 2 a.m. She was sitting in the back booth, wearing a simple black trench coat over a cashmere sweater. No diamonds. No entourage. Her dark hair was pulled back, and for the first time, I could see the faint lines around her eyes that 20 years of pretending had carved into her face. She looked tired. She looked human. I had to make sure I wasn't being followed, I said, sliding into the booth across from her. And I had to make sure you weren't setting me up. She almost smiled. Almost. If I wanted you dead, Marcus, I wouldn't need to set a trap. I would have let the board's cleaners finish the job at Martha's apartment. I studied her face. The detached, calculating survivor in me was still running threat assessments, still looking for the angle. But the part of me that had just held Martha and felt the terrifying relief of not losing the only family I'd ever known, that part was listening. Why this place? I asked. Because 20 years ago, the night I had you smuggled out of the mansion, I came here, she said, her voice quiet. I sat in this exact booth and drank 6 cups of coffee while I waited to hear if you had made it to the orphanage safely. My chest tightened. The fixer called me at 4:17 a.m., she continued, staring at the dark liquid in her mug. He said, the package is delivered. And I cried. Right here, in this booth. The waitress brought me a napkin and asked if I was okay. She looked up at me, and her eyes were dry now. Hard. I've been coming here every year on your birthday, she said. I order 2 slices of cherry pie. I eat one. I leave the other. The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. I didn't know what to do with this information. My cost-benefit analysis had no framework for a mother who had spent 2 decades eating pie for a son she thought was dead. Let's talk about the board, I said, my voice flat. You said they're going to activate Scorched Earth. What does that mean exactly? Eleanor's expression shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the razor-sharp matriarch I had seen in press conferences and business journals. The Board of Elders isn't just a group of greedy relatives, she said. They're a shadow government within the Gu Empire. 7 members. Arthur's uncles, aunts, and cousins. They control the voting trusts, the offshore accounts, and the political leverage. Arthur is the face. They are the machine. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and slid it across the table. I unfolded it. It was a list of names. 7 names. Each one annotated with their specific area of control, judicial influence, media holdings, military contracts, banking relationships. Scorched Earth is their final contingency, Eleanor continued. If they can't control the empire, they destroy it. They'll leak the private ledger to the feds, frame you for the crimes inside it, liquidate every asset, and scatter the remains through a dozen shell companies. By the time the dust settles, the Gu name will be synonymous with corporate treason. And you? I asked. Where do you fit in this? I'm leverage, she said simply. They've been using me to keep Arthur in line for 20 years. If I step out of line, they threaten to reveal what really happened to you. If Arthur steps out of line, they threaten me. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But now you're here, and you have the ledger, and you have something they don't understand. What's that? You have nothing to lose, she said. And that makes you the most dangerous person in Imperial City. Ding. The alert in my mind struck with a sharp, urgent gravity I hadn't felt before. System alert. Existential threat detected. Task 013. The Board of Elders has initiated Phase 1 of Scorched Earth. They are preparing to leak the private ledger to federal authorities within 48 hours. Objective. Neutralize the board's leverage before the leak occurs. Required expenditure, $500 million. Time limit, 48 hours. Reward, 15x cashback plus bonus asset. Complete judicial immunity package. $750 million in cashback. Complete judicial immunity. This wasn't just a task. This was the system telling me the endgame had begun. I need your help, I said to Eleanor. She raised an eyebrow. You? The boy who just tried to destroy my charity. The boy who just saved your grandson's life? I corrected. Cain may be an idiot, but he's still your blood. And if the board activates Scorched Earth, he goes down with the rest of them. She was quiet for a long moment. What do you need? She asked finally. Access, I said. I need to know where the board keeps their physical copies of the leverage files. The ledger I have is digital, but they'll have paper, hard copies, insurance policies. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The vault. It's in the sub-basement of Gu Tower. Biometric access. Only the 7 board members and Arthur have entry. Then we need Arthur, I said. Eleanor let out a short, bitter laugh. Arthur won't help you. He's too afraid of the board. He's been compromised for decades. Everyone has a price, I said. Even patriarchs. And what's his? I studied her. Actually took her in. You, I said. His price is you. You've been holding the leash for 20 years. If you tell him to heal, he'll heal. Eleanor held my gaze for several seconds. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll make the call, she said. But Marcus, if this fails, if the board gets wind of what we're doing, then we'll need to be faster than them, I said. I stood up and threw a $100 bill on the table for the coffee. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door. Why did you really come back to the diner tonight? You could have sent a message. You could have met anywhere. She looked down at her mug, tracing the rim with her finger. Because I needed to see your face, she said softly. I needed to know if you looked like him, or if you looked like me. And do I? She smiled. A real smile this time. Small, sad, but genuine. You look like survival, she said. You look like both of us. I walked out of the diner and into the biting night air. Nova was waiting by the SUV, her eyes sharp, scanning the perimeter. Boss? She asked as I approached. We have a new ally, I said, and a 48-hour countdown to burn the Board of Elders to the ground. She opened the door for me. Where to? I slid into the leather seat and looked out at the glittering skyline of Imperial City. Somewhere in those towers, 7 old men and women were plotting to destroy everything I had built. Goo Tower, I said. We're going to pay Arthur a visit. The gravity between a mother and son who have spent 20 years believing the other was dead isn't warm. It isn't tender. It's the pull of a collapsed star, dense, invisible, and capable of bending everything around it. At 6 a.m., Eleanor Goo and I walked through the front doors of Goo Tower together. Not through the service entrance. Not through the underground garage. Through the main lobby, in broad daylight, flanked by Silas and 4 of his operatives. The security guards froze. The receptionist dropped her phone. Eleanor moved through the lobby like she owned it, because for 20 years, she had. Her posture was immaculate. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see the faint tremor in her left hand, the hand that wasn't holding her coffee cup. Floor 50, she said to the elevator attendant, who looked like he might faint. The doors closed. The numbers climbed. You haven't asked me what I'm going to say to him, Eleanor said, gazing at the digital display. I don't need to, I replied. You're going to tell him to open the vault. He's going to resist. You're going to remind him of what he owes you. And he's going to open it. She looked at me. You've been running cost-benefit analyses on human beings since you were a child, haven't you? Since I was 9, I corrected. A dog taught me the basics. Ding. Floor 50. The doors opened. Arthur Goo was sitting alone at the head of the mahogany table. The boardroom was empty. No lawyers. No Sarah. No Cain. Just a single man in a rumpled suit, gazing into an untouched cup of coffee, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Eleanor, he stood up. When he saw me standing beside her, his knees buckled, and he sat back down. Eleanor, he said. His voice was hoarse. Broken. You brought him here. I brought our son here, she corrected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. And you are going to listen to him. I walked to the opposite end of the table and sat down. The same chair I had occupied during the hostile takeover. The same chair from which I had dismantled his empire. But this wasn't a boardroom negotiation. This was an autopsy of a marriage. Arthur, I said, my tone completely level. I need access to the vault. He flinched. You don't understand what's down there. I understand exactly what's down there, I said. 20 years of the board's leverage. Physical copies of every bribe, every assassination order, every shell company. Insurance policies they keep to ensure your compliance. Arthur's hands were shaking. He looked at Eleanor. If I open that vault, the board will kill us. All of us. They're already trying to kill us, Eleanor said, stepping forward. They sent cleaners after Martha. They're 48 hours away from leaking the ledger and framing Marcus for treason. The Scorched Earth Protocol is active, Arthur. The only question is whether we burn with it, or we burn them first. Arthur buried his face in his hands. For several agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was his ragged breathing. Then he spoke, his voice muffled and small. 20 years. I told myself I was protecting you. Both of you. If I had fought the board, they would have killed Eleanor. If I had come looking for you, Marcus, they would have found you first. So you did nothing, I said. Not angry, not sad, just stating the fact. You sat in this tower and let your son eat garbage. Arthur looked up. His eyes were red, hollow, and full of a shame so deep it had its own gravity. Yes, he whispered. I did nothing, and I have deserved every day of hell that followed. I studied him. I ran the analysis. Arthur Gu was not a predator. He was prey, a man who had been terrified into submission so thoroughly that he had mistaken cowardice for strategy. He had traded his son's life for his own comfort, and the interest on that debt had compounded for 20 years. I didn't forgive him. Forgiveness is a luxury good, and I was still running a lean operation. But I understood him, and understanding is a more useful tool than forgiveness. Open the vault, I said. Now, and when this is over, I will decide whether you are an asset or a liability. Arthur held my gaze. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, titanium key fob. The sub-basement, he said, past the server room. The vault requires my biometrics and a rotating cipher that changes every 6 hours. The current cipher is, he glanced at his watch, valid for another 41 minutes. I took the key fob. Silas, you're with me. Nova, stay here. Make sure no one interrupts. The sub-basement of Gu Tower was not on any architectural blueprint. We descended 3 flights of concrete stairs that smelled like damp earth and old money. At the bottom, a steel door with a biometric scanner and a 12-digit keypad blocked our path. Arthur's key fob activated the scanner. His thumbprint glowed green. I entered the cipher he had provided. The door hissed open. Inside, the vault was smaller than I expected. No larger than a walk-in closet. But the walls were lined with fireproof filing cabinets, and in the center of the room sat a single, steel table with 7 leather-bound dossiers. One for each member of the Board of Elders. I opened the first one. Photographs, bank statements, signed orders, a paper trail so damning it could topple governments. The second dossier contained assassination contracts, 12 of them, spanning 15 years. Political rivals, journalists, whistleblowers, all eliminated with surgical precision and absolute deniability. The third dossier was thinner. It contained a single document, dated 20 years and 2 months ago. Order Alpha, termination of primary heir. Authorized by the Board of Elders, unanimous. Method, staged accident, lower districts. Status, completed. I focused on the word completed. Someone had signed off on it. Someone had confirmed to the board that I was dead. Eleanor's fixer, I said aloud. He reported the job as done. He played both sides. Silas, standing by the door, nodded slowly. Smart man. Took the board's money to confirm the kill. Took Eleanor's money to smuggle the kid. Retired rich. I closed the dossier. Grab everything, I said. Every file. Every photograph. We need these digitized and encrypted within the hour. Ding. System alert. Task 013 complete. Expenditure, $500 million. Cashback multiplier, 15x. $7,500 million transferred to host account. Bonus asset acquired. Complete judicial immunity package. $7.5 billion. Complete judicial immunity. The system was arming me for war. But as Silas loaded the dossiers into a reinforced briefcase, my phone buzzed. It was Nova. Boss, she said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. We have a problem. It's the board. They just made their first move. Talk to me. 5 minutes ago, a coordinated leak hit every major financial news network simultaneously. Anonymous source. They released a partial version of the private ledger. A spike of pure adrenaline hit my veins. Which parts? The parts that implicate you, Nova said. Shell companies, hostile acquisitions, market manipulation. They've stripped out all references to the board's crimes and left only your transactions. The narrative is already forming. Marcus Vance, mystery billionaire, engaged in systematic corporate fraud. I closed my eyes. The board hadn't waited 48 hours. They had accelerated the timeline. They knew we were in the building. They knew we were close to the vault. So they pulled the trigger early, releasing a weaponized, edited version of the ledger that made me the villain and erased themselves from the story entirely. Arthur, I said into the comms. Get to the boardroom. Now. What's happening? His voice crackled back, terrified. The board just declared war on your son. And if you don't stand with us right now, you will die alone in this tower with nothing but your shame for company. A long pause. I'm already in the elevator, Arthur said. I turned to Silas. How fast can you get those dossiers to a secure encryption facility? 30 minutes, he said, snapping the briefcase shut. Then we have 30 minutes to build a narrative that burns 7 old monsters to the ground, I said, walking toward the stairs. Before they burn me first. As we ascended from the vault, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah. Sarah, the board just offered me the CEO position. All I have to do is publicly denounce you and testify that Omega Holdings is a fraud. They're giving me 1 hour to decide. Then a second message. Sarah, I haven't answered yet. I kept my eyes on the screen as the elevator doors opened to the 50th floor. Sarah Gu, the detached, calculating sister, the operational mind of the family. She was standing at a crossroads, and for the first time in her life, she was hesitating. I typed a single reply. Marcus, don't answer them. Come to the boardroom. I'm going to show you what they really are, and then you can decide who deserves your loyalty. I put the phone away. The gutters had taught me how to survive. The boardrooms had taught me how to win. But the next 30 minutes would test something neither of those could prepare me for. Whether the truth was a strong enough weapon to kill a lie that had been building for 20 years. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his hands finally steady. Eleanor stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching the city below like she was calculating how much of it she was about to burn. I was at the center console, connecting the encrypted briefcase Silas had just delivered to the room's presentation system. Encryption complete, Silas said, stepping back. Every document in those dossiers is digitized, verified, and ready to broadcast. You just need to give the word. The word, Eleanor said, is going to cost us everything. Everything we had. I corrected. Not everything we're about to build. The heavy oak doors swung open. Sarah Gu walked in. She was wearing the same cream-colored business suit she'd worn to the gala, but her hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked like a woman who had spent the last hour running every possible scenario in her head and finding that none of them ended well. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes sweeping the room. Arthur, Eleanor, me, Sarah, Arthur said, his voice cracking. You came. Of course I came, she said, her voice sharp. I'm not an idiot. She walked to the table and sat down, placing her phone face down in front of her. The board offered me the CEO position, she said, looking directly at me. All I had to do was denounce you and testify that Omega Holdings was a fraud. And I asked, and I calculated the odds, she said. If I took their deal, I'd be CEO of a company that would be dissolved within 6 months. The board doesn't want to run the empire. They want to liquidate it and scatter the pieces. I'd be the captain of a sinking ship. She paused, then added, quieter. And I looked at the photo they sent me. The one of you is a baby. You have mother's eyes. Welcome to the resistance, Eleanor said. Don't get sentimental, Sarah replied. I'm here because it's the only move that doesn't end with me in federal prison. Good enough, I said. I turned back to the console. Here's the play. The board leaked an edited version of the private ledger that makes me look like a corporate criminal. We're going to release the unedited vault files that show the board's actual crimes. Assassinations, bribes, market manipulation. We release it to every major news network simultaneously. We also send copies to the SEC, the FBI, and the Attorney General's office. That's not enough, Sarah said. The board will spin it. They'll say the vault files are forged. They'll say you fabricated them to cover your own crimes. Which is why we're not just releasing files, I said. We're doing a live broadcast. Right now, from this room, with all of us on camera. Arthur, Eleanor, Sarah, and me. The entire Gu family, publicly testifying against the Board of Elders. Silence. Arthur paled. You want us to go on live television and admit that we've been controlled by the board for 20 years. I want you to admit the truth, I said. All of it. Including the fact that you let your son rot in the gutters while you sat in this tower. Arthur looked at Eleanor. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Do it, she said. Arthur swallowed hard. Then he nodded. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Fine. But if this goes sideways, I'm denying everything and blaming all of you. Deal, I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed Nova. Get the media contacts. Every major network. Tell them the Gu family is holding a press conference in 30 minutes. Live. No questions until the end. Boss, are you sure about this? Nova's voice was tight. Once we go live, there's no taking it back. That's the point, I said. I hung up and turned to the console. Silas, set up the cameras. We're broadcasting from here. At 7:15 a.m., the cameras were live. For chairs. for members of the Gu family. A single table with a stack of dossiers and a microphone in the center. I stood in front of the cameras, looking directly into the lens. My name is Marcus Gu, I said. And for the last 20 years, my family has been controlled by a shadow government known as the Board of Elders. I paused, letting that sink in. 30 minutes ago, an anonymous source leaked documents suggesting that I was engaged in corporate fraud. Those documents were edited, sanitized, weaponized. What I'm about to show you is the unedited truth. I stepped aside and gestured to Arthur. He leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. My name is Arthur Gu. For 20 years, I have been the public face of this family, but I have never had real authority. The Board of Elders has controlled every major decision. They ordered the assassination of political rivals. They manipulated markets. And 20 years ago, his voice broke. 20 years ago, they ordered the assassination of my firstborn son. The camera cut to Eleanor. My name is Eleanor Gu, she said, her voice crisp and unyielding. I was the one who smuggled my son out of this building and into the lower districts to save his life. I have spent 20 years pretending he was dead to protect him from the board. Tonight, that pretense ends. The camera cut to Sarah. My name is Sarah Gu, she said. I have spent my entire life being groomed to take over this company. But the company was never mine to take. It belonged to the board. As of this moment, I am resigning from all positions within Gu Holdings and offering my full cooperation to federal investigators. The camera cut back to me. The documents in these dossiers contain proof of every crime the board has committed over the last 20 years. They are being simultaneously released to every major news network and federal law enforcement agency. The Board of Elders is finished. I stepped back from the microphone. The truth is on the table, I said. Now let's see if the truth is bulletproof. The broadcast lasted 47 minutes. By the end, every major news network was running the story live. The stock market halted trading on Gu Holdings. Federal agents were already en route to the addresses listed in the dossiers. We had done it, or so I thought. At 8:02 a.m., as we were wrapping up the broadcast, the boardroom doors burst open. 6 men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons drawn. Nobody move, the lead cleaner shouted. Silas was already moving, but he was outnumbered. Nova had been stationed outside, but she was too far away. The cleaner's eyes swept the room and landed on me. The board sends its regards, he said, raising his weapon. Time slowed down. I looked at Eleanor. She was calm, resigned. I looked at Arthur. He was frozen, his face pale. I looked at Sarah. She was already reaching for something under the table. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Gunshots rang out, but they weren't aimed at us. They were aimed at the cleaners. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting the room in a dim red glow. The 6 cleaners were down. 3 dead, 3 wounded. Standing in the doorway, weapons still smoking, were Nova and the rest of Silas's team. And behind them, holding a tablet, was a man I didn't recognize. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing an impeccable suit. He walked into the room, stepping over the bodies without flinching. Marcus, he said, his voice calm, authoritative. I believe we haven't been properly introduced. Who are you? I asked, my pulse hammering against my ribs. He smiled. My name is Victor Gu, he said. I'm the chairman of the Board of Elders, and I'm here to offer you a deal. Victor Gu didn't sit down. He walked to the head of the table, the same seat Arthur had occupied for 20 years, and placed his tablet on the polished mahogany. He looked at the bodies of his own cleaners on the floor with the same expression a man might wear when looking at a spilled cup of coffee. Mild annoyance. Nothing more. Let me be direct, Victor said, his voice calm, carrying the weight of absolute authority. The broadcast was effective. Within the hour, federal agents will be raiding the homes of 6 board members. By tomorrow morning, their assets will be frozen. By next week, they'll be in federal prison. He paused, letting that sink in. You've won, Marcus. The Board of Elders, as a functioning entity, is finished. Then why are you here? I asked, my voice devoid of inflection. Why not run? Victor smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just revealed the punchline to a very long, very cruel joke. Because I'm not here to negotiate for the board, he said. I'm here to negotiate for you. The room went silent. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her calculating mind already running scenarios. I don't need anything from you, I said. You have nothing left to offer. On the contrary, Victor replied, I have everything to offer. Because I'm going to tell you the truth about what just happened. About what's been happening for the last 20 years. He tapped his tablet, and a holographic display flickered to life above the table. It showed a timeline. My timeline. Age 7, sleeping in a trash bag. Age 9, fighting a dog for food. Age 15, educating myself in the gutters. Age 19, landing the internship at Apex Solutions. Every milestone, every struggle, every moment of suffering, displayed in sterile, clinical detail. Did you really think it was random? Victor asked, his voice soft, almost gentle. Did you really think a child with your genetic potential just happened to end up in the lower districts? That you just happened to survive? That you just happened to be smart enough, ruthless enough, to build an empire from nothing? My chest tightened. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. I'm talking about investment, Victor said. The board recognized 20 years ago that Arthur was weak, that he would never have the ruthlessness to maintain the empire in a changing world. We needed a successor, someone forged in fire, someone who understood scarcity, who could calculate risk, who could make the hard decisions without hesitation. He gestured to the timeline. So we created you. The words hit me like a physical blow. No, I said. Eleanor smuggled me out. She saved me from you. Eleanor played her part perfectly, Victor agreed. We told her we were going to kill you. We gave her just enough information to make her desperate. And then we let her save you. We placed you in the lower districts. We monitored you. We ensured you had access to just enough resources to survive, but not enough to thrive. We let you struggle. We let you fight. We let you become exactly what we needed. He looked at me with something that might have been pride. You're welcome, by the way. The room was dead silent. I could feel my pulse spiking. 80, 90, 95. You're lying, I said. You're trying to get inside my head. Am I? Victor tapped the tablet again. A new file appeared. It was a series of financial transactions. Anonymous donations to the orphanage where I'd been placed. Anonymous payments to the clinic where I'd been treated after the dog attack. Anonymous scholarships that had allowed me to attend night school. All traced back to shell companies controlled by the board. Every resource you used to build yourself, Victor said, we provided it. Every opportunity, every break, every moment of luck you thought you'd earned, we engineered it. We needed you to believe you were self-made. We needed you to develop that survival instinct, that ruthlessness, that absolute refusal to accept failure. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. And it worked. You became exactly what we needed. The perfect successor. The perfect weapon. And now, you've proven it by dismantling the board single-handedly. I stared at the holographic display. My entire life. My entire identity. The brutal architecture of my survival that had defined me for 20 years. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was a project. You made me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We invested in you, Victor corrected. And now it's time for you to cash out. He slid the tablet across the table toward me. The Goo Empire is yours, he said. All of it. The towers. The logistics. The political leverage. The offshore accounts. Everything. In exchange, the board members walk away. They retire quietly. They disappear. And you take control of the empire you've already proven you can run. I looked at the tablet. Then I looked at Eleanor. She was pale. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Is it true? I asked her. Did you know? She met my gaze. Her eyes were full of something I'd never seen in them before. Shame. I suspected, she said quietly. After I smuggled you out, things were too easy. The orphanage accepted you without questions. The clinic treated you for free. I thought I was lucky. I thought someone was watching over you. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't know it was them. I swear to you, Marcus, I didn't know. I looked back at Victor. And you let her believe that? I asked. You let her spend 20 years thinking she'd saved me, when really you were just letting her play your game? We needed her to be genuine, Victor said. We needed her to raise Sarah and Cain without suspicion. If she'd known the truth, she might have slipped. She might have told Arthur. The deception had to be complete. He gestured to the tablet again. So, what's your decision? You can take the empire and let us retire. Or you can try to destroy us completely, which will take years of legal battles. And in the meantime, the empire will crumble. Your choice. I kept my eyes on the tablet for several seconds. Then I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had just realized the punchline to a joke that had been running his entire life. "You really don't understand me, do you?" I said. Victor's smile faltered slightly. "I don't follow. You think you made me," I said. "You think you engineered my suffering, that you controlled every variable, that I'm just a product of your design." I stepped closer to him. "But you forgot one thing. You forgot that when you put a kid in the gutters and let him fight for survival, you don't just teach him how to win. You teach him how to destroy anyone who tries to control him." I picked up the tablet, and I smashed it against the table. The holographic display flickered and died. "I'm not your successor," I said, my voice stripped of all warmth, absolute. "I'm not your weapon, and I'm certainly not your partner." I turned to Nova. "Arrest him," I said. "He's an accessory to 20 years of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Let the feds sort out the rest." Nova moved instantly, her weapon trained on Victor. Victor didn't resist. He just looked at me with an expression of genuine confusion. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Without the board, the Empire will collapse. You'll have nothing." I met his gaze, truly assessed him. "I grew up with nothing," I said. "I know exactly how to build from there." I turned to Eleanor, Arthur, and Sarah. "The Empire isn't going to collapse," I said. "It's going to be rebuilt, but not the way it was. No more shadow governments. No more board of elders. No more secrets." I looked at each of them in turn. "We're going to run it together, or we're going to burn it to the ground and start over. Your choice." Silence. Then Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm in," she said. Arthur nodded slowly. "Me too." Sarah stood up. "Fine, but I get to keep my corner office." The corners of my mouth twitched. Just once. I turned back to Victor, who was now being escorted out by Nova. "You were wrong about one thing," I said. "You didn't make me. You just gave me a reason to become exactly who I was always going to be." He didn't respond. The doors closed behind him, and for the first time in 20 years, the Gu Empire belonged to the Gu family. All of it. The sun was rising over Imperial City, casting long, golden shadows across the boardroom floor. For the first time in 20 years, the Gu Empire had no shadow government. Victor Gu was in federal custody. The remaining 6 board members were being raided as we spoke. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline. The city looked different today. It didn't look like a predator anymore. It looked like a ledger, waiting to be balanced. Behind me, the new board of directors was assembling. Sarah was already on her phone, efficiently dismantling the board's offshore shell companies and reallocating the funds. Eleanor was quietly drafting the press release that would announce the restructuring of Gu Holdings. And Arthur sat at the head of the table. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The arrogant patriarch was gone, replaced by a humbled, broken man ready to accept whatever role I gave him. I had decided to let him live. I had decided to let him stay in the family. I had decided, against every survival instinct I possessed, to trust him to be a passive, silent figurehead while I ran the empire. I thought the war was over. Ding. The sound in my skull was different this time. It wasn't sharp or urgent. It was final. System alert. Hidden directive unlocked. Task 014. The foundation is compromised. Identify the original architect of the liability. Objective. Decrypt the final layer of the private ledger. Required expenditure, $1. Time limit, 1 minute. Reward. Absolute sovereignty over the primogeniture trust. $1. I pulled out the matte black card. I didn't even need to swipe it. I just authorized the digital ping. Expenditure confirmed. Decrypting. A new file materialized in my mind's eye. It wasn't a financial document. It wasn't an assassination order from the board. It was a memo, dated exactly 20 years and 2 months ago, 2 weeks before I was born. The sender wasn't the board of elders. The sender was Arthur Gu. I read the text. Memorandum. T.O. The board of elders. From Arthur Gu. Preemptive restructuring of succession. The upcoming birth of my first child threatens to trigger the primogeniture clause, effectively stripping me of operational control. I recommend we do not wait for the child to be born. I recommend we terminate the pregnancy immediately. I will handle Eleanor. In exchange, I request a 5% increase in my discretionary voting trust. The memo was signed, digitally verified. The air vanished from my lungs. Eleanor hadn't just countermanded a board order. She had countermanded her husband. Arthur hadn't been a coward who let the board bully him into killing his son. Arthur had been the one who offered me up on a silver platter to secure his own bonus. He hadn't just let me rot in the gutters. He had paid to put me there. I turned around. The three of them looked up. Sarah stopped typing. Eleanor capped her pen. Arthur offered a small, pathetic, apologetic smile. Marcus, Arthur asked gently, is everything all right? The restructuring is on track. I walked slowly back to the table. My pulse settled into a terrifying, glacial rhythm. The ruthless arithmetic of the gutters had completely taken over. Arthur, I said, my voice so quiet it barely carried across the room. Do you know what the most expensive mistake in corporate history is? He blinked, confused by the shift in tone. I suppose it's investing in a failing market. No, I said. It's trusting a liability that has already proven it will sell you out for a profit. I pulled up the memo on the room's central holographic display. The blue light washed over Arthur's face. He read the first line, then the second. The color didn't just drain from his face. It vanished entirely. He looked like a corpse propped up in a chair. Marcus, he whispered, his voice trembling. That's out of context. I was young. I was scared. The board was pressuring me. You weren't pressured, I interrupted, my voice cutting like glass. You initiated it. You offered your unborn son's life to a shadow council in exchange for a 5% bump in your voting trust. You didn't wait for them to decide. You volunteered me. Eleanor stood up. She walked over to the display, her eyes scanning the document. Her hands, usually so steady, began to shake. Arthur, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly, hollow whisper. You told me the board forced you. You told me you fought them, but you lost. I did fight them. Arthur cried, tears finally spilling over. After I sent that, I realized what I'd done. I tried to call it off. I tried to protect you, Eleanor. I swear to God, I tried to protect the baby, but you didn't, I said. You only tried to protect yourself when the guilt got too heavy to carry. You are not a victim of the board, Arthur. You are its founding member. Sarah was staring at him with absolute disgust. You tried to kill your own heir for a 5% trust bump? Cain is an idiot, but at least he doesn't have the stomach for this. I was scared. Arthur sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I was 25 years old, and they told me I was going to lose everything. I made a mistake. A mistake is knocking over a cup of coffee, I said. This was a cost-benefit analysis. And you calculated that my life was worth less than your equity. I looked at the system interface hovering in my peripheral vision. Task 014, pending resolution. I had a choice. I could have Silas take him into the alley and put a bullet in his head. It would be clean. It would be easy. But I wasn't a cleaner anymore. I was an asset manager. And you don't just throw away a depreciating asset. You reassign it. Nova, I said. The door opened, and Nova stepped in, her hand resting on her sidearm. Take Arthur Gu to the sub-basement, I ordered. Not the vault. The archives. The physical paper records from the last 40 years. Arthur looked up, his face wet with tears, confused. Marcus, please. Just fire me. Just let me go. I'm not firing you, I said, looking down at him. You wanted to be a small, invisible part of this company, Arthur. You wanted to hide in the background and let other people make the hard decisions. Congratulations. You're finally qualified. I leaned in close. You are going to catalog every physical document in the GU Holdings archives. By hand. You will work 12-hour shifts. Your salary will be minimum wage. You will not speak to Sarah. You will not speak to Eleanor. And if you ever try to leave this building, Nova will remind you of the cost-benefit analysis of crossing me. Arthur held my gaze, the absolute finality in my eyes breaking whatever was left of his soul. He didn't argue. He just nodded, a broken, defeated man, and stood up to follow Nova out of the room. The door clicked shut. Silence returned to the boardroom. Eleanor sat back down, staring at the empty chair. He was never going to be a father to you, was he? No, I said. But he was a very effective lesson. I turned back to the holographic display. Task 014 complete. Reward. Absolute sovereignty over the primogeniture trust. All bloodline contingencies dissolved. The empire is yours. The GU empire was mine. Truly, completely mine. No more board. No more Arthur. No more shadows. I looked at Sarah and Eleanor. The press release needs an update, I said, my voice returning to its normal, calm cadence. We aren't just restructuring the company. We're dissolving the GU family trust entirely. We're going public. All of it. Sarah smiled, a sharp, predatory thing. I'll draft the prospectus. I walked back to the window. The morning light was absolute now. The city was bright, sharp, and entirely mine. The concrete had taught me how to survive. The glass had taught me how to conquer. But as I looked at my reflection in the window, I realized the final lesson the city had taught me. You can buy the building. You can buy the company. You can even buy the people. But you can never, ever buy back the foundation. The silence that follows the destruction of a man's life isn't peaceful. It isn't triumphant. It's the silence of a vacuum, the sound of something that used to be there but isn't anymore. I stood in the boardroom, looking at the empty chair where Arthur had sat for 20 years. The leather was still warm. "Boss," Nova said quietly from the doorway. "The press conference is in 2 hours. Sarah wants to confirm the talking points. Tell her I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. She nodded and disappeared. I turned back to the window. The city stretched out below me, glittering and sharp. Every tower, every street, every shadow was mine now. The Gu Empire, restructured, purified, reborn. I had won. So why did I feel like I was running a cost-benefit analysis on my own soul? Ding. The sound in my skull was different. Not urgent. Not cold. It was warm. System alert. Final directive unlocked. Task 015. The infrastructure is complete. The foundation must be honored. Objective. Return to the origin point. Balance the oldest outstanding ledger. Required expenditure. Variable. Time limit. 24 hours. Reward. System integration complete. I stared at the floating text. Return to the origin point. I knew exactly where that was. At 11 a.m., I stood outside a 6-story walk-up in the Apex district. The building's bones were the same. The scuffed linoleum in the lobby, the faint scent of boiled cabbage and floor wax, the drafty windows. But something had changed. The front door had been repaired. The broken window on the second floor had been replaced. The graffiti on the side wall had been painted over. Silas stood by the SUV, his arms crossed. "We sent a crew last night," he said. "Structural repairs, new plumbing, updated electrical. The building is up to code for the first time in 40 years. Good, I said. I walked up the stairs. My body remembered the rhythm. Second floor. Third floor. I knocked on apartment 3B. The door opened. Martha stood there, wearing a cardigan I had bought her 3 days ago. Her hair was pulled back in its usual bun. Her eyes were sharp, warm, and completely unsurprised to see me. "Took you long enough," she said. I smiled. A genuine one. "You knew I'd come back." "I knew you'd come back when you were ready," she corrected. "Come in." I made tea. I stepped inside. The apartment was exactly the same. The same worn couch. The same kitchen table with the wobbly leg. The same view of the alley through the single window. But on the table, there was a stack of documents. Martha poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from me. She pushed the documents toward me. "I assume you know what these are," she said. I picked them up. They were property deeds. Not just for this building. For the entire block. 6 buildings, 42 apartments. All of them purchased in the last 48 hours through a series of shell companies. All of them transferred to a single owner. Martha Chun. She took a sip of her tea. "Nova brought these over this morning, along with a management contract that guarantees me $200,000 a year for life, plus full medical and housing. That's the market rate for a portfolio this size," I said, my tone strictly business. "Marcus," she said, setting down her cup. "This is worth $30 million. 32.4, I corrected. But the buildings are undervalued. With the renovations, they'll be worth 45 within 2 years. Marcus." I looked up. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't categorize. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't shock. It was something older. Something deeper. "Why?" she asked. I ran the analysis. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head a dozen times. I had a speech prepared about asset allocation, about long-term investment, about the mathematical inevitability of compounding returns. But looking at her, the words dissolved. "Because," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, 20 years ago, you gave a kid a room with walls that didn't breathe wind. You didn't ask for his name. You didn't ask for his story. You just gave him a key." I looked down at the documents in my hands. I didn't know how to say thank you, so I paid my rent 3 days early every month. But that wasn't enough. It was never enough. I met her gaze. "Consider this back rent, Martha. For the 3 years you didn't charge me when the heater broke in winter. For the nights you left food outside my door when you knew I hadn't eaten. for treating me like a son when I didn't know how to be one. I set the documents down. The ledger is balanced. Martha held my gaze for several seconds. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, calloused, grounding. "You idiot," she said, her voice thick. "You absolute idiot. You think you can balance a ledger like this? You think love is a transaction? It's the only one I understand," I said. She squeezed my hand. "Then you need to learn a new currency, Marcus. Because this." She gestured to the buildings, the documents, the empire I had built and laid at her feet. "This isn't payment. This is a gift. And you don't owe me anything. You never did." I sat there, holding her hand, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't run a cost-benefit analysis. I just let myself be held. At 2 p.m., I was back at Gu Tower. The press conference had gone perfectly. Sarah had been brilliant, sharp, confident, utterly convincing. Eleanor had been composed, regal, the picture of a matriarch who had survived 20 years of hell and come out stronger. The market had responded positively. Gu Holdings stock was up 8%. I sat in my new office, the one Arthur had occupied for 2 decades, and stared at the system interface. Task 015 pending completion. Remaining objective, return to the origin point. I had been to Martha's building. I had balanced that ledger. But there was another origin point, one I had been avoiding. I pulled out my phone and dialed Eleanor's number. "Marcus," she answered on the first ring. "I need to see you," I said. "Of course," she said. "Where?" "The diner," I said. "The one in the lower districts. Tonight. 8 o'clock. "I'll be there," she said. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The system had given me 1,000 tasks. Spend this. Buy that. Acquire this company. Destroy that rival. But this final task wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about the one variable I had never been able to calculate. The one variable that had defined me for 20 years. The one variable I had spent my entire life trying to solve. What does it mean to be a son? At 8 p.m., I walked into the diner. Eleanor was already there, sitting in the same booth she had occupied 20 years ago. She was wearing the same simple black trench coat she'd worn the last time we met. No jewelry, no security detail. She looked up as I slid into the booth across from her. "You came," she said. "I always come back to the origin point," I said. She smiled faintly. "You look like him." "Who?" "Your father," she said. "But not the Arthur you know. The Arthur from before. The Arthur who used to sit in this exact booth and tell me he was going to build an empire that would last 1,000 years. She looked down at her coffee cup. "He was a dreamer, you know, before the board got to him, before they turned him into a coward. He used to talk about the future like it was something we could build together, like it was something worth fighting for." I studied her face, the lines around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. "Why did you really stay with him?" I asked. "For 20 years. You could have left. You could have taken Sarah and Cain and disappeared." She looked up at me. Her eyes were dry, clear. "Because I knew you were alive," she said. "And I knew that if I left, the board would come for you. They would find you, and they would finish what they started." She leaned forward. "I stayed because I was your shield, Marcus. I was the wall between you and the wolves. Every day I sat at that table, every time I smiled for the cameras, every time I pretended to be the perfect wife, I was buying you time. I was keeping you invisible." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "And it worked. You survived. You became exactly what I hoped you would become. Someone strong enough to burn them all down." I let the quiet stretch between us. The diner was quiet except for the low hum of the neon sign in the window and the clatter of a coffee mug in the kitchen. "I found the memo," I said finally. "Arthur's memo. The one where he offered to terminate the pregnancy." Eleanor closed her eyes. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to hate him," she said. "I wanted you to have that anger. I wanted you to use it to fuel you. And I was afraid that if you knew the truth, that he had tried to kill you before you were even born, that he had been planning it for months, you would realize that you were never wanted, that you were always just a liability." She opened her eyes. "And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear you thinking you were unloved. Because you were loved, Marcus. You were loved so fiercely it broke me." I truly examined her face. The woman who had spent 20 years eating cherry pie for a son she thought was dead. The woman who had been my shield, my shadow, my silent protector. The woman who had saved my life by letting me believe she had abandoned me. Ding. The sound in my skull was warm. "Final. System alert. Task 015 complete." Expenditure, variable. Reward, system integration complete. All tasks fulfilled. All ledgers balanced. Protocol, the system will now deactivate. The infrastructure is yours. The holographic interface that had lived in the corner of my vision for months flickered once. And then it vanished. Completely. I sat there, staring at the empty air where the system had been. It was gone. No more tasks. No more cashback. No more directives. Just me. Eleanor watched me, her eyes sharp. What happened? I looked at her. Nothing, I said. She nodded slowly that I looked around the diner. At the flickering neon sign. At the vinyl booths patched with duct tape. At the 2 slices of cherry pie on the counter. One eaten, one waiting. I looked back at my mother. Now, I said, I build something worth keeping. 2 years later, the rain in Imperial City hadn't changed. It still fell in biting, sharp sheets, turning the concrete into a mirror that reflected the neon signs of the lower districts. It still smelled like wet asphalt, boiled cabbage, and the faint, metallic tang of survival. I stood under the awning of a closed bodega, watching the water cascade off the edge in a perfect curtain. I was 22 now, the youngest majority shareholder of the largest conglomerate in the city. The man who had dismantled a shadow government, purged his own bloodline, and rebuilt an empire from the ashes of a 20-year lie. And tonight, I had nowhere to be. No board meetings. No hostile takeovers. No system tasks flashing in my peripheral vision. Just rain and concrete and the quiet hum of a city that didn't know I owned half of it. Nova was waiting in the SUV 3 blocks away. She'd offered to drive me around, to wait in the car, to stand guard with an umbrella. I told her no. Some walks you have to take alone. I stepped out from under the awning and let the rain hit me. It soaked through my jacket, ran down my neck, pooled in my shoes. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't calculating the cost of getting wet. I wasn't assessing the structural integrity of my shelter. I was just standing in the rain, feeling it. It felt like freedom. I walked for an hour, past the orphanage where I'd been placed, past the clinic where I'd been stitched up after the dog attack, past the community center where I'd studied under flickering streetlights. All of them had been renovated in the last 2 years. New windows, new plumbing, new roofs, all funded by the Martha Chin Foundation, which had quietly absorbed every property I'd transferred to her. She'd refused to put my name on any of it. It's your money, she told me when I tried to argue. But it's my legacy, and I'm not letting you hide behind it. So the buildings bore her name, and I let her. The next morning, I met Sarah at Gu Holdings. She was already at her desk, surrounded by merger documents and holographic projections. The CEO title was officially hers. She'd restructured the company, purged the corruption, and turned it into something lean, efficient, and profitable. You're early, she said without looking up. The logistics merger isn't due for review until noon. I trust you, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Just wanted to see how the new leadership looks in the wild. She finally looked up, smirking. You're getting soft, Marcus. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just learning that not everything has to be a transaction. She truly studied my face. Then she nodded. Good. Because the company doesn't need a ruthless bastard anymore. It needs a leader. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. At noon, I met Eleanor at the diner. She was sitting in the same booth she'd occupied for 20 years, eating cherry pie. 2 slices. One for her. One for me. You look tired, she said when I slid into the booth. I'm not tired, I said. I'm just done. She raised an eyebrow. Done with what? Done running, I said. Done calculating. Done building. She studied me for a moment. Then she pushed the second slice of pie toward me. Eat. We're going to my place after this. I have something to show you. We walked to her apartment in the upper districts. Not the mansion. Not the estate. Just a quiet, modest place with large windows and a view of the river. When we stepped inside, I saw it. Canvases lined the walls. Watercolors. Abstract shapes bleeding into each other, forming something beautiful and undefined. You're getting better, I said, looking at the latest piece on the easel. She smiled, picking up a damp brush. I've had 20 years to practice. 20 years of pretending, of surviving, of swallowing every ugly truth so you could have a chance to live. I spent all that time holding my breath. Now, I'm finally learning how to exhale. We sat on the balcony and watched the river flow past. The water reflected the afternoon sun, calm and steady. Are you happy? I asked. She thought about it. I'm at peace, she said finally. That's more than I expected. I nodded. That was enough. At 4 p.m., I visited Martha. She was in the courtyard of the newly renovated community center, kneeling in the dirt with her sleeves rolled up, tying up tomato vines to wooden stakes. Her hands were stained with soil, her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was barking orders at a group of teenagers helping her set up irrigation lines. Marcus, she said without looking up when I approached. If you're here to donate money, the answer is no. The foundation has enough. If you're here to volunteer, grab a trowel. I knelt beside her and took a wooden stake from the pile. I'll help with the stakes. She finally looked at me, her eyes warm but sharp. Good. You always were better with your hands than your mouth. We worked in comfortable silence for 20 minutes. The sun was warm. The dirt smelled rich and alive. When we finished the last row, she wiped her forehead with the back of her glove and handed me a glass of iced tea from a cooler. You build all this, she said, gesturing to the courtyard, the community center, the kids laughing near the garden beds. But don't you forget who keeps it running. Buildings don't feed people. Systems don't hold them together. People do. And people get tired. I know, I said. Good, she said. Then remember this. You don't have to carry the foundation forever. You just have to make sure it doesn't collapse. And you pay your damn rent 3 days early, or I'm raising it. I almost laughed. I will. She squeezed my shoulder, her grip firm and grounding. You're still my kid, Marcus. Don't let the money make you forget that. At 6 p.m., I went to see Cain. He was working at a logistics warehouse in the lower districts. Entry level, minimum wage, no perks, no privileges. He'd fought it at first. Screamed, threatened, begged. But I'd been clear. He could either work his way up through the company like everyone else, or he could leave with nothing. He'd chosen to stay. He was loading boxes onto a truck when I arrived. He looked up, saw me, and his jaw tightened. Marcus, he said, his tone clipped and guarded. Cain, I replied. How's the work? He wiped sweat from his forehead. It's work, he said. Hard. But I'm learning. I nodded. Good. Keep at it. Maybe in 5 years, you'll be a shift supervisor. He stared at me, searching for mockery, for cruelty, for the punchline. There wasn't one. Thanks, he said finally. Quiet. Sincere. I walked away. At 9 p.m., I was back at Starry Manor. Nova was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Silas was in the study, reviewing security protocols. The house was quiet, peaceful. I stood by the window, looking out at the city. The rain had stopped. The clouds had parted, and the stars were visible for the first time in weeks. I thought about Eleanor, exhaling after 20 years of holding her breath. About Sarah, running the empire with cold, sharp efficiency. About Martha, keeping the roots strong while the branches reached high. About Cain, learning what it meant to work for something. I thought about Arthur, cataloging documents in the sub-basement, paying his debt 1 page at a time. I thought about the board of elders, rotting in federal prison. About Victor Gu, who tried to make me a weapon and had accidentally made me a man. I didn't need the system anymore. I had built something the system could never give me. I had built a foundation. I thought about the concrete and the glass. About the people, the messy, complicated, beautiful people who had taught me how to live. I turned away from the window and walked toward the kitchen. Nova looked up as I entered. Dinner's almost ready, she said. I know, I said. I can smell it. She smiled. Good, because I made your favorite. I sat down at the table, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't calculating the odds. I was just eating dinner. With family. 5 years later, the rain in Imperial City hadn't changed. It still fell in cold, sharp sheets, turning the concrete into a mirror that reflected the neon signs of the lower districts. It still smelled like rust and old cooking oil and the faint, metallic tang of survival. But I didn't mind it anymore. I stood at the gates of the Chun-Vance orphanage, watching the children play in the covered courtyard despite the rain. The building was new, modern, with large windows that let in natural light, a proper kitchen, and rooms that didn't breathe wind. I was 25 now. I held no official title. I was a ghost in the corporate records, a silent majority shareholder who owned half the city but rarely stepped foot in a boardroom. I was the infrastructure that held the new empire together, invisible by design. And today, I had come home. Not to Starry Manor, not to Gu Holdings, but here, to the place where it all began. I walked through the courtyard, past the playground, past the garden beds that Martha still tended herself. The children ran past me, laughing, their shoes splashing through puddles, their faces bright with the kind of joy I'd never known at their age. I stopped under the covered walkway and watched them. A young woman in a foundation jacket approached me, holding a tablet. "Mr. Vance, the new wing is almost complete. We'll have room for 30 more children by next month." "Good," I said. "Make sure the rooms are warm, and the windows don't leak." She smiled. "Already done, sir." "Martha's standards, remember?" I nodded. "Martha's standards. 3 days early rent. No exceptions." I walked through the building, past the classrooms where teachers worked with small groups, past the library where kids sat cross-legged on the floor reading, past the kitchen where the smell of fresh bread filled the air. This was my legacy, not the empire, not the wealth. This. I stepped outside and walked down the street, past the old alley where I'd slept, past the community center, past the clinic. I didn't need to check on them anymore. They were running themselves, sustained by the foundation, by Martha's tireless work, by the systems I'd built. At the end of the block, I stopped. Under the fire escape of an abandoned building, huddled behind a stack of cardboard boxes, was a kid. He looked about 10, lean, sharp-featured, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big. His eyes were dark, watchful, calculating. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He was assessing me, running his own cost-benefit analysis, deciding whether I was a threat or a variable he could use. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself. I stopped 10 feet away. The rain drummed against the pavement between us. "You're smart," I said. "I can see it in your eyes. You're running the math on everything around you." The kid didn't respond. He just gripped the cardboard box tighter. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a card. It wasn't black anymore. It was white, with the Chun-Vance Orphanage logo embossed in silver. An admission card. A key. I held it out. "Take this to the orphanage on Chun Street," I said. "Ask for Director Chun. Tell them Marcus sent you. They'll give you a room, food, schooling, a future." The kid stared at the card, then at me. "Why?" he asked. A faint smile touched my lips. "Because the math says it's a good investment," I said. "And because 20 years ago, someone gave me a key. I'm just passing it forward." He took the card. His fingers were chilled, rough, calloused from survival. "What's your name?" I asked. "Leo," he said. "Leo," I repeated. "Study hard. Learn everything you can. And in 10 years, come work for me." He nodded once. Sharp. Efficient. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard him shift, settling back under the fire escape. But this time, he wasn't just surviving. He had a plan. He had a future. I walked back through the rain-slicked streets, past the places that had shaped me, past the memories that had defined me. The concrete had taught me how to survive. The glass had taught me how to conquer. But the people, the messy, complicated, beautiful people, were teaching me how to live. And now, I was learning how to give. I reached the idling SUV where Nova was waiting. She opened the door for me, her expression professional as always, but I saw the faint smile at the corners of her mouth. "Ready to go home, boss?" she asked. I slid into the leather seat. The door closed, sealing out the rain and the cold. "Yeah," I said. "Take us home." The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the glittering, vertical ambition of Imperial City. I looked back one last time, through the rear window, at the orphanage receding into the distance. Somewhere back there, a kid named Leo was walking toward a door that would change his life. Somewhere back there, a foundation was opening its arms to another child who'd been forgotten. Somewhere back there, the cycle was continuing. And for the first time in my life, Marcus Gu wasn't running from the dark. He was the one holding the light.